My son-in-law looked at my painting and laughed. He turned to his business partner and said in perfect German, "Look at this trash. The old man thinks it is art, but it is just garbage I have to tolerate." He didn't know I spent 10 years in Berlin. He didn't know I understood every single word, and he certainly didn't know that the garbage he just spat on was worth $3.6 million. I just smiled and poured him more wine. The checkmate would come later. I am Bernard Freeman, 68 years old. Most people look at me and see a slow, arthritic man with gray hair and a cane. They see someone who has outlived his usefulness, but they don't see the soldier who once organized logistics for an entire battalion. They don't see the man who built a life from nothing. Tonight, however, I am none of those things. Tonight, in the house that I paid for, I am a ghost. The noise of the party was deafening. Crystal glasses clinked against each other, a sound that used to signal celebration but now sounded like warning bells. I stood in the corner of the living room holding a silver tray of empty champagne flutes. I wasn't hired help. I was the father of the hostess. But you wouldn't know it by looking at the guests. They looked through me, their eyes sliding over my face as if I were part of the beige wallpaper my daughter Alicia had chosen to cover the original oak paneling. My knees throbbed. The arthritis was flaring up with the coming rain, a sharp grinding pain that shot up my leg every time I shifted my weight. I wanted to sit down. The velvet armchair near the fireplace looked inviting, but I knew better. That chair was for guests. That chair was for people who mattered. Gavin, my son-in-law, stood in the center of the room. He was holding Cord a glass of scotch in one hand, gesturing wildly with the other. He wore a suit that cost more than my first car, the fabric shimmering under the chandelier lights. He was 38, loud, and possessed the kind of confidence that only comes from never having been told no. "Move, Bernard, you are blocking the flow," Gavin snapped as he brushed past me. He didn't look at me. He didn't say Dad or Mr. Freeman, just Bernard, like I was a clumsy waiter. I stepped back, gripping the tray tighter. My knuckles turned ash gray. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive perfume and hypocrisy. This was my house. I bought it 30 years ago. I raised Alicia here. I carried her through that front door when she scraped her knee. I danced with my late wife Esther on these floorboards. But 6 months ago, when Gavin convinced Alicia that selling my townhouse to them for $1 would help his tax situation and keep the family together, I signed the deed. I thought I was securing my future. I didn't know I was signing my own eviction notice from Dignity. The front door opened, and a hush fell over the room. Gavin straightened his tie, his face transforming into a mask of eager desperation. 2 men walked in, tall, severe, dressed in dark European cuts. These were the German investors Gavin had been bragging about for weeks, the men who were supposed to save his failing venture capital firm. "Herr Muller, Herr Weiss, welcome," Gavin boomed, his voice dropping an octave to sound more authoritative. He extended his hand, his smile so wide it looked painful. The Germans nodded politely, their eyes scanning the room with critical precision. They didn't seem impressed by the hors d'oeuvres or the rented string quartet. They looked bored. Gavin sensed it. I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip. He needed a distraction. He needed something to show he was a man of culture, a man of worldly tastes. His eyes darted around the room and landed on the far wall. There, hanging slightly crooked because my hands had been shaking earlier, was my painting. It was a large canvas, a chaotic swirl of grays, deep blues, and violent slashes of black. To the untrained eye, it looked like a mess. To me, it looked like the Berlin Wall in winter. It looked like the silence after a bomb goes off. It was a gift from an old friend, a starving artist I knew back in '78. I had insisted on bringing it down from my bedroom for the party, thinking it added character. Alicia had rolled her eyes, but she let me hang it in the corner, hidden behind a potted fern. Gavin marched the investors over to the painting. He grabbed the fern and shoved it aside, exposing the canvas. "Ah, art," Gavin announced in English, then switched to German. He had been taking lessons online for a year, claiming it was the language of business. He sounded like a tourist ordering a kebab, his accent thick and clumsy, but he thought he sounded like Goethe. "Here, gentlemen, look at this," Gavin said in German. I was standing 6 feet away collecting empty napkins. My back stiffened. The German language hit my ears like a familiar song. I hadn't spoken it in 40 years, not since I left the service, not since I left Hans. But you don't forget a language you learned in love and war. It rushed back to me, every syllable clear as crystal. Look at this trash, Gavin said in German, gesturing at the canvas. My father-in-law insists on displaying it. He thinks it is a masterpiece. He found it in a garage sale or a dumpster, who knows? The two investors looked at the painting. They didn't laugh. They leaned in closer. Gavin continued, emboldened by their silence. He winked at the taller man, Muller. You know how these old people are. Especially him. He has no concept of value. He thinks big and messy means expensive. I just let him hang it to keep him quiet. It is just garbage I have to tolerate like him. My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't the insult to the painting that stung. I was used to people not understanding abstract expressionism. It was the way he said it. Garbage I have to tolerate. Like him. He was talking about me. He was calling me garbage in a foreign tongue right in front of my face, convinced that the old black man holding the tray was too uneducated, too simple to understand. I felt a flash of heat rise up my neck. My grip on the silver tray tightened until the metal bit into my palm. I wanted to drop the tray. I wanted to walk over there, look him in the eye, and answer him in flawless Berlin dialect German. I wanted to tell him that his accent was atrocious and his soul was rotten. I wanted to tell him that while he was playing video games in his frat house, I was navigating checkpoints in East Germany. But I didn't. Years of discipline held me in place. If I reacted now, if I caused a scene, I would just be the angry, senile old man ruining the party. Gavin would play the victim. He would tell Alicia I was losing my mind. And Alicia, God help me, Alicia would believe him. She always believed him. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done. I swallowed the rage. It tasted like bile. I stepped forward, forcing a confused, innocent smile onto my face. I shuffled my feet a little, exaggerating my limp. More champagne, gentlemen, I asked, my voice cracking just enough to sound frail. Gavin jumped, startled by my proximity. He looked at me with panic for a split second, wondering if I had understood. He searched my face. I kept my eyes wide, vacant, the picture of a harmless, oblivious grandfather. The panic left Gavin's eyes replaced by contempt. No, Bernard, he said in English, speaking slowly as if to a child. We are talking business. Go check on the kitchen. I nodded, bobbing my head. Of course. The kitchen. Good idea. I turned to leave, but not before I saw the shorter investor, Herr Weiss, looking at me. He wasn't looking at me with contempt. He was looking at me with curiosity. Then his eyes drifted back to the painting, and I saw his pupils dilate. He knew. He saw something Gavin didn't, but he remained silent. Alicia appeared at Gavin's elbow, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked beautiful in her silk dress, but her eyes were tired. She looked at the painting, then at Gavin, then at me. Daddy, she whispered, her voice tight. Why is that thing displayed so prominently? I thought we agreed it would stay in the hallway. The investors were asking about it. Gavin lied smoothly. I was just explaining that it has sentimental value to you. Alicia let out a breath of relief. Oh, okay. She turned to me. Dad, maybe we should move it later. It really clashes with the decor. It's a bit much, you know. It's just a hobby, Dad, she added, patting my arm. A patronizing pat. The kind you give a dog that brought you a dead bird. That hurt more than the German insults. My own daughter dismissing the one thing I had kept from my past. The one thing that proved I had a life before I was just her father. I understand, sweetie, I said softly. I'll move it. Not now, Bernard, Gavin snapped. Don't disrupt the flow. Do it after the guests leave. And put it in the basement. We need this wall for the projector tomorrow. The basement. The word hung in the air. The basement was unfinished. It was damp. It smelled of mildew and cold concrete. It was where they stored the broken Christmas decorations and the old exercise bike Gavin never used. And now it was where they wanted me to put my soul. I lowered my eyes. Yes, Gavin. The basement. The rest of the night was a blur of servitude. I refilled glasses. I picked up discarded napkins. I listened to Gavin butcher the German language and laugh at jokes he didn't understand. I watched the investors leave, Herr Weiss casting one last longing look at my painting before stepping out into the night. When the last guest had gone, the silence returned. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was heavy. Gavin loosened his tie and flopped onto the sofa. God, what a night. Those Germans are stiff as boards, but I think I charmed them. Alicia was cleaning up empty glasses. You were great, honey. You really impressed them. Gavin looked at me. I was standing by the painting, my hand resting on the frame. Bernard," he said, his voice dropping the fake charm. I meant what I said. "Get that thing out of here. My design team is coming at 8 a.m. I don't want them seeing that eyesore." I didn't argue. I didn't remind him that it was 2 in the morning and my arthritis was screaming. I carefully lifted the canvas off the wall. It was heavy, heavier than I remembered. Or maybe I was just weaker. I carried it through the kitchen, past the stainless steel appliances I wasn't allowed to touch without permission, and opened the door to the basement. A draft of cold air hit me, chilling the sweat on my forehead. "Where are you going?" Alicia asked, looking up from the sink. "Downstairs," I said. "Like you asked." "Oh," she said, pausing. "Well, there's a cot down there, and the space heater. Maybe you should just sleep down there tonight, Dad. It's late, and we don't want you waking us up moving around upstairs in the morning." I froze on the top step. They weren't just banishing the painting, they were banishing me. I looked at my daughter. I looked for the little girl who used to cry when I left for work. I didn't see her. I only saw Gavin's wife. "Okay," I said. "Good night, Alicia." I walked down the wooden stairs, the darkness swallowing me. The door clicked shut behind me, followed by the distinct sound of a deadbolt sliding into place. They locked it. They locked me in the basement of my own house. I set the painting down against the cold cinder block wall. My shoulder burned. I sat on the edge of the dusty cot and looked at the canvas in the dim light of a single bulb. The chaos of colors swirled before me. Gavin thought this was trash. He thought I was trash. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I had recorded the entire conversation, every German slur, every insult. I looked at the painting again. I remembered what Hans had told me in that drafty loft in Kreuzberg 40 years ago. "This is not chaos, Bernard. This is the sound of walls breaking." I touched the rough texture of the paint. Gavin was right about one thing. This painting was going to change everything. But not in the way he thought. He saw a piece of garbage to be discarded. I saw a weapon. I lay back on the cot, pulling my thin jacket tight around me to ward off the chill. Let them sleep in their expensive bed upstairs. Let them think they have won. Tomorrow the old man in the basement was going to make a phone call, and the walls were going to come crashing down. The basement smelled of wet earth and abandonment. It was a sharp and musky scent that clung to the back of my throat. I sat on the edge of the folding cot my daughter had pointed to and listened to the house settle above me. The floorboards creaked under the weight of the party cleanup upstairs, but down here everything was silent. The concrete floor was cold enough to seep through the soles of my shoes and into my aching bones. My knees were throbbing with a dull and rhythmic pain that synced with the beating of my heart. I reached into my pocket for my medication, but my fingers brushed only lint. Gavin had taken the bottle earlier, saying he would keep it safe in the medicine cabinet upstairs so I would not lose it. He was managing me. He was managing my life right into a corner. I did not complain. I did not call out for Alicia. I had slept in foxholes in Germany with mud freezing to my boots. I had slept in a station wagon when I first came back to the States and could not find work. This basement, with its single flickering bulb and the hum of the water heater, was a palace compared to where I had been. But the insult burned hotter than the cold. This was the home I had paid for with 30 years of sweat, and yet I was the intruder. I stood up slowly and my joints popped in the quiet room. I walked over to where I had propped the painting against the cinder block wall. In this dim light, the canvas looked even more chaotic. Swirls of charcoal gray and violent midnight blue clashed with streaks of white that looked like scars. To Gavin, it was a mess. To me, it was a map of a world that had been broken and put back together. I took a rag from a shelf of cleaning supplies nearby. It was an old t-shirt of mine that Alicia had relegated to a dust cloth. I began to wipe the frame gently. The wood was rough-hewn and unpolished, just the way Hans had made it. I treated the painting with the same reverence I used to treat my service rifle. It was not just an object, it was a witness. As my hand moved over the textured oil paint, the present moment seemed to stretch and thin. I was not just in a damp basement in Chicago anymore. I could smell turpentine and stale cigarette smoke. I could feel the biting wind coming through the broken window of a loft in Kreuzberg. Hans Weber stood there in my memory, clear as day. He was a skinny man with paint under his fingernails and a hunger in his eyes that food could not satisfy. We were both outcasts back then. I was a black soldier in a white man's army, and he was an artist in a city divided by a wall. I remembered the day he gave me this canvas. He had no money to pay me for the supplies I had smuggled out of the base for him. He had shoved this heavy painting into my arms instead. I remembered his voice raspy from the cheap tobacco he smoked. "Keep it, Bernard. Someday the world will understand." That was all he said. He did not say it was valuable. He did not say it was beautiful. He just said the world would understand. I traced the thick ridge of blue paint near the center. Hans had painted his rage and his silence into every stroke. He called it the chaos of silence. It was about the things we cannot say, the screams that get stuck in our throats. Looking at it now, I realized it was also about me. It was about the silence of a father who watches his daughter fade away. It was about the silence of a man stripped of his dignity by a boy who has never known struggle. I was not just cleaning a painting. I was reconnecting with an old ally. Hans was gone now, dead of an overdose 10 years ago, but his spirit was trapped in these layers of oil. Gavin called it trash. But as I wiped away a cobweb from the corner, I saw the way the light hit the hidden underpainting. There was depth here that a superficial man like Gavin could never see. There were secrets buried under the surface. The sound of the basement door opening upstairs shattered the memory. A rectangle of harsh yellow light from the hallway cut across the darkness. Heavy footsteps thudded down the wooden stairs. It was not the tentative step of Alicia coming to apologize. It was the aggressive stomp of ownership. Gavin descended into the basement. He had taken off his suit jacket and loosened his tie, but he still looked like he was posing for a magazine. He held a glass of scotch in one hand, and his face was flushed with alcohol and arrogance. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked around with a sneer curling his lip. "It stinks down here," he said. I did not answer. I kept my hand on the frame of the painting standing between him and the artwork. He walked over to me, swaying slightly. He looked at the cot and then at the painting. Then, without warning, he lashed out with his foot. His expensive leather dress shoe connected with the bottom corner of the frame. The painting skidded a few inches across the concrete. I flinched, but I did not move to strike him, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Get this thing out of the way," Gavin spat. "I need this corner for my golf clubs. I have a new set of titanium drivers coming tomorrow, and I am not going to have them get damp because you want to play art gallery in my storage room." "It is not in the way, Gavin," I said, keeping my voice level. "It is in the way if I say it is in the way," he countered, stepping closer. He invaded my personal space, smelling of expensive scotch and entitlement. "You are here because I allow you to be here, Bernard. This house is mine. This basement is mine. And if I want to use this wall for my golf practice, then this garbage goes in the trash. Do you understand?" He poked a finger into my chest. It was a hard and disrespectful jab right over my heart. "If this is not moved and covered with a tarp by morning, I am throwing it out with the recycling," he said. "I mean it. I am done looking at it." He turned his back on me, dismissing me as if I were a piece of furniture. He walked toward the other side of the basement where the old fuse box was located, pretending to inspect the wiring. He was marking his territory, making sure I knew that there was not a single inch of this property that I could call my own. I watched him. I watched the way he moved with a slight stumble. He was not just drunk on power. He was drunk on fear. I had seen that walk before in green recruits before their first patrol. He was trying too hard to look in control. Suddenly his phone rang. The shrill tone echoed off the concrete walls. Gavin stiffened. He pulled the phone from his pocket and looked at the screen. His arrogance evaporated, instantly replaced by a look of sheer terror. He glanced back at me. Seeing me standing in the shadows, he likely assumed I was too old and too deaf to hear him, or too stupid to understand. He turned away from me, facing the fuse box, and answered the phone. His voice dropped to a frantic whisper. "I told you not to call me at home," he hissed. I stood perfectly still. I stopped breathing so I could hear every word. My hearing was the one thing age had not taken from me. "I am getting the money," Gavin said, his voice trembling. "I just need a few more days. The house is already in my name. I am leveraging it. No, listen to me. Do not come here. My wife is here." He listened to the person on the other end, and I saw his shoulders hunch up as if he were expecting a blow. $500,000 is a lot of liquid cash to move," he pleaded. "I said I have it. I just need to liquidate some assets. Please, if you come here, it ruins everything. Just give me until Friday." He hung up the phone and leaned his forehead against the cold metal of the fuse box. He let out a long, shaky breath. I stood in the shadows, my hand resting on the painting that Hans had told me to keep. Gavin thought I was a helpless old man living in his basement. He thought he was the one in charge. But as I watched him tremble, I realized the truth. He was drowning. He was $500,000 in debt to people who did not send late notices. He had stolen my house to pay his debts. And now he was going to sell everything we had to save his own skin. Gavin straightened up, putting his mask of arrogance back on before he turned around. He did not look at me again as he walked back up the stairs. He slammed the door shut and I heard the lock click once more. I looked down at the painting. Gavin wanted to throw it away. He had no idea that the solution to his problems and the instrument of his destruction was sitting right here against the wall. But he would never know. Not until I was ready. I sat back down on the cot. The cold did not bother me anymore. I had a warm thought to keep me company. I knew his secret. And in a war, information is more valuable than ammunition. I closed my eyes, and for the first time that day I smiled. Let him play golf. I was about to play a much more dangerous game. The morning rain was not just weather, it was a physical assault on my joints. I woke up with a sensation that felt like someone had poured broken glass into my knees. Every movement was a negotiation with pain. I sat on the edge of the cot in the basement and reached for the orange pill bottle on the crate I used as a nightstand. My fingers grasped only empty plastic. The bottle was light. Too light. I shook it, hoping for the rattle of a single forgotten pill, but there was only silence. I remembered then. I had put the refill request on the kitchen counter 2 days ago. I had clipped the copay amount to the prescription paper just as I always did. It was my money. It came from my pension, which Gavin now controlled under the guise of financial stewardship. I pulled myself up, using the wall for support. The climb up the basement stairs took 5 minutes. Each step sent a jolt of fire through my legs, but I did not groan. I would not give them the satisfaction of hearing me suffer. When I reached the kitchen, the prescription paper was gone. Gavin was sitting at the island reading news on his tablet and drinking espresso. He did not look up when I entered. "Gavin," I said, keeping my voice steady. "The pharmacy called. They said the prescription was not picked up." He swiped a finger across his screen and took a sip of coffee. "We are cutting back Bernard," he said without looking at me. "That medication is brand name. It is exorbitant." I canceled the order. "We will look for a generic alternative next month." Next month. He was telling a man with chronic arthritis to wait 30 days for relief because he wanted to save $40. $40 that belonged to me in the first place. "I need that medicine, Gavin," I said. "I cannot walk without it." "Then sit down," he snapped, finally looking at me with cold, dead eyes. "You do not have anywhere to go anyway. Besides, we have a budget to maintain." He stood up and pointed to a pile of laundry baskets near the mudroom. "And while you are up, Alicia needs those towels washed and folded. The maid is off today, so you need to earn your keep." He walked out of the room, leaving me standing there with my knees trembling. I looked at the laundry baskets. They were heavy. The laundry room was on the second floor. I did not argue. I did not call Alicia. I picked up the first basket. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the plastic handles. I walked to the stairs. 1 step. Pain. 2 steps. Fire. I gritted my teeth so hard I thought they would crack. I used to march 20 miles with a rucksack full of gear. I used to build supply lines under enemy fire. I would not let a basket of towels defeat me. I climbed that mountain of a staircase 1 agonizing inch at a time, carrying the weight of my humiliation along with the linens. Dinner that night was a theater of cruelty. The dining room was dimly lit the way Gavin liked it, pretending we were in a 5-star restaurant instead of a family home. Alicia had cooked a roast, but she sat hunched over her plate, picking at the meat like a nervous bird. I sat at the far end of the table. My portion was smaller than everyone else. Gavin claimed it was for my health, saying that at my age digestion was sluggish. He poured himself a large glass of red wine and swirled it, looking at the legs of the wine against the glass. He was in a talkative mood, which was always dangerous. When Gavin was quiet, he was plotting. When he was talkative, he was hunting. "I saw the neighbors outside today," he said, slicing his steak with surgical precision. "The Hendersons. They asked who the old man was that they saw limping to the mailbox." Alicia kept her eyes on her plate. "I told them it was just a relative staying for a while," Gavin continued, taking a bite. I did not want to elaborate. "You know how this neighborhood is, Bernard. It is exclusive. People here pay a premium for a certain aesthetic, a certain atmosphere." I slowly lowered my fork. I knew exactly what he was saying. I had heard this tone before in the 60s. I had heard it from officers who smiled while they denied my promotion. I had heard it from landlords who suddenly had no vacancies when I showed up to view an apartment. "What exactly are you saying, Gavin?" I asked. He smiled. It was a tight, thin smile that did not reach his eyes. "I am saying you stick out, Bernard. You do not fit the demographic. This is a progressive community, of course, but property values are sensitive. Seeing you shuffling around in your old clothes looking like a vagrant, well, it makes people ask questions." He took a sip of wine and leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting over my face with open disdain. "You should be grateful, Bernard. Most men like you end up in state facilities or on the street. But I let you live here. I let you live in a multi-million-dollar home in a zip code you could never dream of affording on your own. You are living in luxury thanks to my generosity. You should show a little more appreciation and a little less attitude." My hand tightened around my fork. The metal dug into my palm. A hot wave of rage surged up from my stomach, drowning out the pain in my knees. I wanted to lunge across the table. I wanted to drive the fork into the pristine white tablecloth. I wanted to scream that I bought this house. I wanted to scream that his luxury was funded by my life savings. I wanted to tell him that while he was learning how to cheat on his taxes, I was learning how to survive in a world that wanted me dead. The muscles in my forearm twitched. I was 1 second away from violence, 1 second away from losing everything. But then I looked at Alicia. She was trembling. She was terrified. Not of me, but of what would happen if the peace was broken. And I remembered the plan. I exhaled slowly, forcing the soldier back into his cage. I loosened my grip on the fork. I picked up my water glass and took a sip, washing down the bitterness. "Thank you, Gavin," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "I will try to be more invisible." Gavin chuckled, satisfied with my submission. "See, Alicia, he understands his place. You just have to be firm." "Excuse me," I said, pushing my chair back. "Nature calls." I walked out of the dining room, keeping my back straight despite the pain. I entered the powder room under the stairs and locked the door. My hands were shaking now, not from fear but from the adrenaline of suppressed rage. I turned on the faucet, letting the water run loud and cold. I pulled my burner phone from my sock. It was a cheap, prepaid device I had bought with cash I found in old coat pockets. Gavin tracked the landline and my regular cell phone, but he did not know about this one. I dialed a number I had memorized. It rang twice. "Harper Law Firm," a sharp female voice answered. "It is Bernard," I whispered, leaning close to the phone. "Mr. Freeman." The voice softened instantly, but lost none of its professional edge. "Are you safe?" "For now," I said. "He cut my medication today, and he is documenting everything as expenses. He is bleeding the accounts dry, Harper." "Do you have proof?" Harper asked. "I have the bank alerts on my old email," I said, "and I have a recording of him admitting to the debt." "He owes $500,000 to loan sharks," Good Harper said. "That establishes motive for financial abuse. Hold on to that, Bernard. We need one more thing. We need him to make a move on the big asset. We need him to try to sell something that is undeniably yours. That is the trap." "He is getting desperate," I said. "It will not be long. Stay strong, Mr. Freeman. We are building the coffin. We just need him to lie down in it." I hung up and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. The eyes staring back were not the eyes of a victim. They were the eyes of a sniper waiting for the target to walk into the crosshairs. I turned off the water and unlocked the door. When I returned to the dining room, Gavin was beaming. He looked like a man who had just solved a puzzle. "I have had a brilliant idea," he announced as I sat down. Alicia looked up warily. "What is it, honey?" "The charity gala next week," Gavin said. "I have been trying to think of a way to make a splash, to show the partners that we are liquid and charitable. We need to donate something significant to the auction." He turned his gaze to me, and his smile widened into a predator grin. "I am going to donate that painting, Bernard. The big ugly one in the basement." My heart stopped. This was it. This was the moment Harper had talked about. But Gavin Alicia started. "That is Dad's. It is clutter," Gavin interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "It is taking up space." And Bernard said he wanted to be useful. What better way to be useful than to donate his trash to a good cause? It will barely fetch a few $100 for the frame, but it is the gesture that counts. It shows we are cleaning house. He looked at me, challenging me to object. "We will list it as an anonymous donation from the Thorne family estate," he said. "It will be a nice tax write-off." I looked at him. I looked at the man who thought he was stripping me of my last possession. He thought he was taking my garbage. He had no idea he was handing me the key to his own prison cell. "That sounds very generous, Gavin," I said quietly. "Excellent," he said, clapping his hands. "I will have the movers take it to the auction house tomorrow. Finally, we can get some real use out of that eyesore." I picked up my fork and took a bite of the cold potatoes. They tasted like victory. The pen felt like a lead weight in my hand. It was a cheap plastic ballpoint that Gavin had tossed onto the kitchen island. Beside it lay a stack of documents that smelled of laser printer toner and betrayal. Gavin stood over me with his arms crossed and his foot tapping a frantic rhythm on the hardwood floor. He was wearing his tennis whites, but there was no sport in his eyes, only desperation. "Sign it, Bernard," he said, his voice tight with impatience. "It is just a standard authorization form. It allows me to liquidate the clutter in the garage and the attic without dragging you to the notary every single time. We are doing this for you, to clear out space, to simplify your life." I looked at the document. It was not just for the garage, it was a general power of attorney limited to personal property disposal. If I signed this, Gavin could legally sell everything I owned, down to the watch on my wrist and the shoes on my feet. He could sell the painting. He could sell it for $10 or $10 million and legally pocket the money as my financial guardian. I looked at Alicia. She was standing by the refrigerator pretending to organize magnets. She would not look at me. She knew this was wrong, but her fear of Gavin was stronger than her love for me. I gripped the pen tighter. My arthritis was real, but the tremor that started in my hand was calculated. In the military, I had learned about coercion. I knew that a signature signed under duress had to look different than a signature signed in freedom. It was a fail-safe, a signal to any forensic handwriting expert that the person holding the pen was not in their right mind or was being forced. I put the tip of the pen to the paper. "Hurry up, old man," Gavin snapped, checking his watch. "I have a tea time in 20 minutes. I let my hand shake violently. I dragged the pen across the signature line, creating a jagged and broken scrawl that barely resembled my name. I skipped the middle initial entirely. I pressed down hard at the end, ripping the paper slightly. It was the signature of a man losing control. It was the signature of a victim. To a bank or a court later on, this would be evidence. To Gavin, it was just another sign of my decline. He snatched the paper away before the ink was dry. "Jesus, look at that," he muttered, blowing on the ink. "You write like a toddler." "It is pathetic." He shoved the paper into his portfolio and zipped it shut. The sound of the zipper was like a body bag closing. "Done," he said. "Now I can finally get rid of that junk in the storage unit. And that painting downstairs is next on the list." He walked out the back door whistling. He thought he had just won the lottery. He thought he had just secured the right to sell my life. He did not know he had just handed me the weapon I would use to destroy him in court. I waited until I heard his car pull out of the driveway. I waited until Alicia went upstairs to take her shower. Then I moved. I went straight to the basement. I did not limp. I moved with the urgency of a soldier behind enemy lines. I locked the door behind me and wedged a chair under the handle. I needed 10 minutes of absolute security. I went to the painting. I pulled it away from the wall and laid it flat on the cot. I pulled my burner phone from my sock. The screen was cracked, but the camera lens was still clear. I turned on the flashlight feature. I remembered what Hans had told me 40 years ago in that freezing loft in Berlin. He had said that the truth is always hidden in the shadows. He told me that if I ever needed to prove the provenance of the work, I had to look where the light did not naturally fall. I shone the light at a sharp angle across the bottom right corner of the canvas. To the naked eye, it looked like a thick glob of black paint, a mistake, a textured mess. But under the raking light, the shadows lengthened and shifted. There it was. Scratched into the wet paint with the back of a brush handle were 3 tiny characters. HW8. Not 1978, just the number 8. This was the 8th painting in his Chaos series. The Lost Painting. The one the art world thought had been destroyed in a fire in Munich. My hands were shaking for real now. I steadied my breathing. I brought the phone close and snapped 3 pictures. One of the full canvas, one of the texture, and one of the hidden signature revealed by the shadow. I opened my encrypted email app. I attached the photos. I typed a single line of text. Subject verify. Body Hans Weber. Chaos series number 8. Berlin 1978. Confirm valuation. I hit send. The little blue progress bar crawled across the screen. The signal in the basement was weak. I held my breath, watching the bar move. 20%, 50%, 90% sent. I deleted the sent email. I deleted the photos from the gallery. I turned off the phone and shoved it deep inside the mattress of the cot. I sat in the dark and waited. The silence of the basement was heavy. I could hear the water moving through the pipes. I could hear the beating of my own heart. I was betting everything on a ghost from my past. If I was wrong, if this was just a sentimental piece of junk, then Gavin wins. He sells it for $50 and I die in a state home. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The phone in the mattress buzzed. A single short vibration. I ripped it out of the bedding. It was an incoming call from a New York number. I answered it, but I did not speak. "Bernard, is that you?" a voice whispered. It was Weiss. He sounded breathless, as if he had just run a marathon. "It is me," I said softly. "Bernard, where are you?" Weiss asked. "Are you safe?" "I am in a basement," I said. "Just tell me, Weiss. Tell me what I have." I heard the sound of papers rustling on the other end. I heard Weiss take a drink of something. "Bernard, I am looking at the photos on a secure monitor," he said. "The brushwork is unmistakable. The impasto technique on the blue section is unique to Weber's Berlin period. And the signature. My God, Bernard, we have been looking for number 8 for 30 years. How much?" I asked. There was a pause. "The last Weber from this series sold at Sotheby's 4 years ago for $2.1 million, Weiss said. "But that was number 4 and it had restoration work. Yours looks pristine, unblemished." "How much, Weiss?" I repeated. "Conservative estimate," Weiss said, his voice trembling with excitement. $3 million. With the right auction house, maybe 3.6, maybe 4. Bernard, you are sitting on a gold mine. $3.6 million. The number echoed in the small concrete room. 3.6 million. It was more money than I had earned in my entire life. It was enough to buy this house 10 times over. It was enough to crush Gavin Thorne into dust. I looked at the painting lying on the dirty cot. It did not look like money. It looked like freedom. I felt a scream rising in my chest. A scream of vindication. A scream of victory. I wanted to run upstairs and shove the phone in Gavin's face. I wanted to tell Alicia that her father was not a burden but a millionaire. But I bit my tongue. I bit it until I tasted copper. Silence. "Bernard, silence is the weapon. Do not tell anyone, Weiss," I whispered. "Not a soul. Prepare the paperwork. I will get it to you. But I have to move carefully. There are wolves in the house." "I understand," Weiss said. "Be careful, my friend. You are carrying a national treasure." I hung up. I slid the phone back into the mattress. I sat there in the dark, trembling. I was rich. I was powerful. And I was wearing second-hand clothes in a damp basement. The irony was bitter, but the hope was sweet. Suddenly the doorknob rattled. The chair I had wedged under the handle groaned. Someone was trying to get in. "Open the door." Bernard Gavin's voice came through the wood, muffled and angry. "I know you are in there. Why is this locked?" I scrambled up. I grabbed the painting and leaned it back against the wall, covering the spot where I had hidden the phone. I kicked the chair away and opened the door just as Gavin shoved it from the other side. He stumbled into the room, his face red. He was back early. The golf game must have been canceled. "What are you doing?" he demanded, looking around the room suspiciously. "Why did you lock the door?" "I was changing my shirt," I lied, pointing to the laundry basket. "I wanted privacy." "Privacy," Gavin spat. "You are in my basement. You do not have privacy." He pushed past me. He looked around the room, sniffing the air as if he could smell the secret I was hiding. His eyes landed on the cot where the blanket was rumpled. He walked over and ripped the blanket off. Nothing. Just the bare mattress. The phone was deep inside the stuffing. He turned and looked at the painting. He stared at it for a long time. My heart hammered against my ribs. Did he know? Did he suspect? "You are hiding something, Bernard," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I can feel it. You have that look on your face. That look you get when you think you are smarter than me." He walked over to my small stack of books on the floor. My Bible, my reading glasses, a few old letters. He kicked the stack, scattering them across the damp floor. "Where is the money?" he asked. "What money?" I asked, playing the confused old man. "Do not lie to me," Gavin shouted. "I know you have cash stashed down here. Old people always stash cash. You sold your house. You have a pension. Where is the rest of it?" He began to tear the room apart. He pulled the drawers out of the plastic storage unit, dumping my underwear and socks onto the dirty concrete. He shook out my coat pockets. He was looking for a few $100s. He was looking for petty cash to pay a gambling debt or a bar tab. He was standing inches away from a $3 million painting, and he was searching through my dirty socks for loose change. The ignorance was staggering. "I have nothing, Gavin," I said calmly. "You have access to all my accounts. You know that." He threw my coat on the floor and stepped on it. "I am watching you, Bernard," he hissed, getting right in my face. "If I find out you are holding out on me, if I find out you have 1 red cent that you are not contributing to this household, I will put you on the street so fast your head will spin." He turned and stormed up the stairs, leaving me standing amidst the wreckage of my few belongings. I looked down at my Bible lying open on the floor. I looked at the painting standing untouched against the wall. He had searched everywhere except the one place that mattered. He was a fool, and fools are easily parted from their kingdoms. I knelt down and began to pick up my clothes. I folded them neatly. I was not afraid anymore. Let him search. Let him threaten. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now I just had to wait for him to swallow the hook. The doorbell rang at 10 in the morning, piercing the heavy silence of the house like a warning shot. I was in the kitchen wiping down the granite countertops that I was not allowed to dirty. Gavin walked in from the foyer, leading a man who looked less like an art appraiser and more like a used car salesman who had lost his lot. "This is my buddy Chad," Gavin announced, clapping the man on the shoulder. "He runs that pawn shop downtown. He knows everything about everything. He is here to give us a professional valuation on that thing downstairs." Chad wore a polo shirt that was too tight across his stomach, and he chewed gum with his mouth open. He did not carry a magnifying glass or a UV light or any of the tools a real expert like Weiss would use. He carried a clipboard and an air of unearned confidence. "Nice place you got here, Gavin," Chad said, looking around at the crown molding. "Real classy." "Thanks," Gavin said, puffing out his chest. "We are doing some spring cleaning. The father-in-law has some old junk we need to liquidate for tax purposes. You know how it is." I stood by the sink, my hands gripping the wet rag. I knew exactly what this was. This was theater. This was a performance designed to strip the last shred of value from my name before they tossed me out. "Let us see the masterpiece," Chad said with a smirk. We walked down to the basement. I followed them, my steps slow and deliberate. Every stair was a reminder of my age, but my mind was sharp. I watched them descend. They did not treat the space with respect. They walked in like landlords inspecting a tenement. The painting stood against the wall where I had left it. In the harsh overhead light, it looked dark and brooding. Chad did not even step close to it. He stood 5 feet away, his hands on his hips, rocking back on his heels. He looked at it for maybe 10 seconds. "Yeah, I have seen this kind of stuff before," Chad said, popping his gum. "It is hotel art. You know the kind they hang in the lobby to cover up stains on the wall? Abstract, expressionist wannabe junk." He waved his hand dismissively. "The frame is cheap wood," he continued. "The canvas is low quality. Honestly, Gavin, if you put this out on the curb, you would have to pay the garbage man to take it." Gavin laughed, a loud barking sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "I told you," Bernard Gavin said, turning to me with a triumphant grin. "I told you it was trash. But you insisted it had sentimental value." "It was a gift," I said quietly, keeping my eyes on the floor. "Yeah, well, your friend who gave it to you probably found it in a dumpster," Chad said. "Look, I can give you $20 for the frame. I can use the wood for scrap." $20, Gavin repeated, shaking his head. "That is generous, Chad." I stood there listening to them dismantle the legacy of a genius. They were two blind men mocking the sunrise. But I had to play my part. I had to be the defeated old man. "I cannot sell it for $20, I said, my voice trembling just enough. "It is all I have left of him." Gavin rolled his eyes. "Oh, for God's sake, Bernard, do not be dramatic. We are doing you a favor. We are clearing out your clutter so you have more room for your cot." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a money clip. It was thick with cash. My cash. Money he had siphoned from my accounts for household management expenses. He peeled off a $50 bill. "Here," Gavin said. $50. That is more than double what Chad offered. I am buying it from you. Now it is mine, and I can do whatever I want with it, including donating it to the auction so we can get a tax write-off." He did not hand me the money. He flicked his wrist and tossed the bill into the air. The $50 bill fluttered down slowly like a dying leaf. It landed on the dirty concrete floor right between my feet. "There," Gavin said. Consider it a bonus. Now pick it up." The silence in the room was absolute. Chad stopped chewing his gum. Even he seemed to realize that a line had been crossed. I looked down at the bill. Ulysses S. Grant stared back at me from the gray dust. To pick it up, I would have to bend my knees. Gavin knew my knees were agony. He knew that kneeling was an act of submission. He was not paying for the painting. He was paying to watch me crawl. I looked up at him. His eyes were cold and expectant. He wanted me to break. He wanted me to yell or cry or refuse so he could throw me out for insubordination. I would not give him that pleasure. I took a breath. I bent my knees. Pain shot up my legs, hot and jagged like lightning. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted iron. I lowered myself slowly, inch by agonizing inch. I kept my back straight. I was a soldier. I had knelt in the mud to tend to wounded men. I could kneel on concrete to secure my victory. My fingers touched the cold floor. I grasped the bill. I stood up. The ascent was harder than the descent. My joints popped. My breath hitched. But I rose. I held the bill in my hand. It felt dirty. "Thank you, Gavin," I said. Gavin smirked. "Good. Now we are done." Chad helped me load this thing into the van. "Wait," I said. Gavin turned back, annoyed. "What now?" "I need a receipt," I said. Gavin laughed incredulously. "A receipt? For a $50 piece of junk? Are you senile?" "I am not senile," I said, shuffling my feet and looking down. I am afraid of the taxman, Gavin. You know how they are. If you donate it and claim a value, they might come asking me where I got the money. I need proof that I sold it to you, that it is not my property anymore. I do not want any trouble." Gavin sighed loud and long. He looked at Chad. "Can you believe this guy? He thinks the IRS cares about his $50. Just write him the note," Chad said, checking his watch. "Let us get out of this dungeon." "Fine," Gavin snapped. He looked around for paper. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small notepad and a pen. I had them ready. I always had them ready. "Write it down," I said, holding them out. Gavin snatched the notepad. "What do you want me to say?" "Say that you, Gavin Thorne, bought the painting from Bernard Freeman for $50, I said. Gavin wrote furiously, the pen scratching loud against the paper. "And Gavin," I added softly, "put down that it is a copy." Gavin stopped writing and looked at me. "A copy." "Yes," I said. "I do not want anyone thinking I sold them a real, whatever Chad called it, a real abstract masterpiece. If they find out it is just a cheap reproduction, like Chad said, they might sue me for fraud. Just write that you bought the reproduction, for my protection." Gavin looked at Chad and they both burst out laughing. "Oh my God," Chad wheezed. "He thinks someone is going to sue him for fraud over this garbage." "Write it," Chad said, wiping a tear from his eye. "Put down that it is a fake. Make the old man happy." Gavin shook his head, still chuckling. "You are unbelievable, Bernard." "Fine." He bent over the paper again. "I hereby purchase the decorative reproduction painting from Bernard Freeman for the sum of $50. Signed, Gavin Thorne." He tore the page out of the notepad and shoved it into my chest. There he said, "It is official. You sold me a fake painting for $50. Are you happy now, legal eagle?" "Yes, Gavin," I said, taking the paper. "I am very happy." "Now get out of the way," Gavin said. He and Chad grabbed the painting. They were careless. Chad bumped the corner against the wall. They hauled it up the stairs, grunting and joking about how they were going to frame the receipt as a joke. I stood in the basement alone. The pain in my knees was still there, but it felt distant now. I looked at the piece of paper in my hand. Gavin S.'s handwriting was jagged and hasty. He had not read it carefully. He had not thought about the legal definition of the word reproduction. He had simply assumed that because he called it trash, it was trash. He had just signed a document stating that he paid $50 for a copy, which meant that if the painting he walked out with turned out to be a copy, he had no legal recourse. And if the painting I still possessed turned out to be the original, he had no claim to it. He had just legally separated himself from $3.6 million. I walked over to the corner of the room where my old Bible sat on a crate. It was a King James version, leather-bound and worn from years of seeking comfort in the Psalms. I opened the book. I did not turn to the Psalms today. I turned to the story of Samson, the man who was blinded and mocked by his enemies until he brought the house down on top of them. I smoothed out the crumpled receipt. I placed it carefully between the pages. I closed the heavy book. The thud was final. Upstairs, I heard the front door slam. The van engine started and faded away. I was no longer the old man with the bad knees. I was no longer the unwanted father-in-law. I stood up straight in the center of the empty room. The hunt had begun, and the wolf had just walked right into the cage. The shouting started at 7 in the evening. It began as a low rumble like distant thunder, but quickly escalated into a storm that shook the walls of the townhouse. I was in the kitchen washing dishes by hand because Gavin claimed the dishwasher used too much electricity. My hands were submerged in warm soapy water, but my blood ran cold. I knew that tone. It was the sound of a man looking for a punching bag because the world had beaten him down. Gavin was screaming about a credit card bill. He was pacing the living room floor, his heavy footsteps vibrating through the floorboards. Alicia was sobbing. It was a jagged and broken sound that tore at my heart. I turned off the faucet and dried my hands on a rag. I walked to the doorway of the living room. Alicia was on her knees on the expensive Persian rug, picking up the shards of a crystal vase Gavin had thrown. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in black streaks. She looked small. She looked defeated. "You are useless," Alicia Gavin roared, standing over her. "You spend money like we are royalty. Do you not understand that the liquidity is tight right now? Do you not understand that I am the only one holding this family together?" He kicked a piece of glass across the room. It skittered across the floor and hit the wall near my foot. Alicia did not fight back. She never did. She just whispered apologies to the floor. "I am sorry, Gavin. I just bought groceries. I did not know the card was maxed out." "Groceries," Gavin mocked her voice. "You bought organic nonsense. You are bleeding me dry, Alicia. You and your senile father are parasites. I should just cut you both loose." He reached down and grabbed her by the arm, hauling her to her feet. His grip was tight enough to bruise. Alicia cried out in pain. "Stop it," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the noise in the room. I stepped fully into the living room. I left the safety of the shadows. I was 68 years old and my knees were crumbling, but I stood tall. Gavin turned to look at me. His face was red and his eyes were wild with alcohol and stress. He let go of Alicia and she stumbled back against the sofa, clutching her arm. "Go back to your room, old man," Gavin snarled. "This does not concern you. It concerns me when you put your hands on my daughter," I said, walking closer. "You can take my money, Gavin. You can take my house. You can insult me in a language you think I do not understand. But you will not hurt her." Gavin laughed. It was a dry and humorless sound. "Or what, Bernard? What are you going to do? You can barely walk. You are a cripple." He stepped toward me, closing the distance. He towered over me. He smelled of scotch and fear. "I am telling you to step back," I said, keeping my voice calm. "You do not give orders here," Gavin shouted. "I own you. I own this house. I own the clothes on your back." He shoved me. It was not a playful push. It was a violent thrust of both hands against my chest. I was not ready for it. My bad leg gave way. I stumbled backward. My heel caught on the edge of the rug. I fell hard. My left shoulder hit the corner of the heavy oak console table before I hit the floor. A sickening pop echoed in the room, followed by a flash of white, hot pain that blinded me for a second. My shoulder was dislocated. The pain was absolute. It stole the breath from my lungs. I lay on the floor, gasping, clutching my arm. Daddy Alicia screamed. She rushed toward me, but Gavin grabbed her shoulder and held her back. "Leave him!" Gavin spat. He tripped. Clumsy old fool. He looked down at me with contempt. There was no regret in his eyes. Only disgust. "Look what you made me do," Bernard Gavin said, panting. "You make me the bad guy. You push and push until I snap. This is your fault." I looked up at him through the haze of pain. I memorized his face. I memorized the way the light hit his sneering lip. I memorized the cowardice in his eyes. "Get up," Gavin said, kicking my foot. "Stop being dramatic. Go to your room." I did not say a word. I did not cry out. I used my good arm to push myself up. The pain in my shoulder was a screaming siren, but I forced it into the back of my mind. I stood up. I looked at Alicia. She was weeping silently, her hand over her mouth. She did not come to help me. She was too afraid. That was the moment the last thread of hope snapped. I realized I could not save her by staying. I had to destroy him to save her. I turned and walked away. I dragged my leg. I cradled my arm. I walked out of the living room and down the hall. "Where are you going?" Gavin yelled after me. "Do not walk away from me when I am talking to you." I kept walking. I went to the kitchen. I grabbed a bag of frozen peas from the freezer and pressed it to my shoulder. The cold bit into my skin, distracting me from the throbbing ache. I went to the basement door. "I am going to sleep, Gavin," I called back. My voice was steady, terrifyingly steady. I went down the stairs into the darkness. I did not sleep. I turned on the single light bulb. The basement was cold and silent. I set the frozen peas on the cot. I went to the corner where the painting stood covered by a drop cloth. Gavin thought he had broken me. He thought I was cowering in the dark, licking my wounds. He was wrong. I reached behind the water heater where I had hidden the package weeks ago. It was a large flat object wrapped in brown paper. I had ordered it from an online print shop shortly after I moved in. It was a high-resolution canvas print of a generic abstract painting. It had similar colors to the Chaos series, dark blues and grays, but it was flat and lifeless. It was decor art. It was worth $40. I took the real painting, the masterpiece by Hans Weber. I looked at it one last time. I ran my fingers over the textured signature hidden in the corner. "I am sorry, Hans," I whispered. "You have to leave this place." I placed the real painting into a large black contractor bag. I taped it shut. To anyone looking, it would just look like a bag of old clothes or trash. I took the fake canvas, the cheap print, and placed it against the wall exactly where the real one had been. I draped the drop cloth over it, leaving just a corner exposed. In the dim light, it looked identical. Gavin would never know the difference. He had never really looked at it. He only saw trash. I packed a small duffel bag, a change of clothes, my Bible, the receipt Gavin had signed, my burner phone. I sat on the cot and gripped my left wrist with my right hand. I took a deep breath. I needed my arm to work. I needed to drive. I gritted my teeth. I jerked my arm. The snap was loud. The pain caused black spots to dance in my vision. I almost passed out. I sat there sweating and gasping for air until the world stopped spinning. My shoulder was back in place. It was throbbing, but it moved. I stood up. I put on my coat. I picked up the black bag containing $3.6 million. I walked up the basement stairs. I listened at the door. The house was quiet. Gavin and Alicia had gone upstairs to their bedroom. I slipped out the back door into the rain. The cold water soaked me instantly, but I did not feel it. I felt clean. I felt light. I walked to the detached garage. My old Buick was parked in the corner, covered in dust. Gavin allowed me to keep it there only because he was too lazy to sell it. I opened the trunk and placed the black bag inside gently. I got into the driver's seat. The engine started with a low rumble. I backed out of the driveway. I paused at the end of the street and looked back at the house. The windows of the master bedroom were dark. They were sleeping. They were sleeping on top of a lie. I put the car in drive. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Gavin. "Don't bother coming up for breakfast. Stay in the basement until you learn some respect." I looked at the text and deleted it. I drove away into the rain. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm. Snap, snap, snap. I was homeless. I was injured. I was alone. But as I emerged onto the highway heading toward the city, I started to laugh. It started as a chuckle and grew into a deep belly laugh that hurt my ribs. Gavin thought he had kicked out a burden. He thought he had won. He had just thrown away the only thing that could have saved him. And tomorrow, when the sun rose, he would wake up the owner of a $40 print and a mountain of debt. I was not running away. I was regrouping. The old soldier was gone. The general had taken the field, and the war had just begun. 2 days had passed since I drove away from the townhouse in the rain. I was no longer the shivering old man with the dislocated shoulder. I was sitting in a high-back leather chair in a private viewing room in Manhattan. The air smelled of beeswax and old money. But even though I was 1,000 miles away, I knew exactly what was happening back in Chicago. I could see it as clearly as if I were standing in the shadows of the living room. Gavin was hosting his party. It was the night of his grand charity gala, the event he had been planning for months to impress his failing investors. He had likely hired the same catering company that overcharged for stale crab cakes. He had likely forced Alicia to wear the blue dress he liked, the one that was too tight and made her look uncomfortable. I imagined him standing in the center of the foyer holding a glass of sparkling wine that he pretended was champagne. He would be beaming. He would be telling his guests the story of his heroic patience. "Yes, it is true," Gavin would say, shaking his head with mock sadness. "We finally had to make the difficult decision to move Bernard to a specialized facility. The dementia was getting worse. He became violent. It was not safe for Alicia anymore. He would pause for effect, waiting for the sympathetic murmurs from the crowd. He was painting a portrait of himself as the martyr, the benevolent son-in-law who had done everything he could until his hand was forced. He would not mention the night he shoved me. He would not mention the basement. He would not mention the prescription he canceled. And then the centerpiece of his performance would begin. He would lead the guests into the great room where he had set up an easel. Draped in a velvet cloth would be the painting, or rather the $40 canvas print I had left in its place. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gavin would announce, his voice booming. "As a symbol of our commitment to moving forward, we are auctioning off this piece from Bernard's personal collection. He always believed it was a masterpiece. We had it appraised and, well, let us just say the value is purely sentimental. But every dollar raised tonight goes to the fund for confused elderly citizens." The crowd would chuckle. They would laugh at the inside joke. The joke was me. Gavin would whip off the velvet cloth, revealing the flat, lifeless print. To him, it looked exactly the same as the oil painting he had kicked in the basement. He did not have the eyes to see the lack of texture. He did not see that the light died on the surface instead of dancing within the layers. He saw a prop that proved he was in charge. I could hear his voice in my head. "Bidding starts at $50, he would say, grinning. "Do I hear $50 for this unique example of chaotic finger painting?" While Gavin was playing the clown in a house he did not own, I was being treated like a king in a world he could not enter. The private viewing room at the auction house in New York was silent. There was no clinking of cheap glass. There was no forced laughter. The walls were lined with dark wood and the floor was marble that shone like water. Herr Weiss stood next to me. He was wearing a suit that was tailored to the millimeter. He wore white cotton gloves. "Mr. Freeman," Weiss said softly, "it is breathtaking." We were looking at the real painting, the chaos of silence. It sat on a display stand illuminated by a single focused beam of light. Here in this room, it did not look like trash. It looked like a storm captured in a bottle. The blue strokes seemed to vibrate with energy. The black slashes cut deep into the soul. I adjusted the cuff of my new jacket. I had used the last of my savings to buy a suit that fit. I had shaved. I had walked into the building with my head high, ignoring the pain in my knees. The director of the auction house, a woman with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing, walked in. She carried a leather portfolio. "Mr. Freeman," she said, extending her hand, "we have completed the provenance verification. The forensic analysis of the paint samples matches Hans Weber S. Berlin period perfectly. The hidden signature is authentic. And the story you provided about your time in Kreuzberg checks out with the historical records of Weber S. Associates." She opened the portfolio and placed a document on the table. "This is our official estimate," she said. I looked at the number. It was higher than Weiss had guessed on the phone. $4.2 million. I felt a lump form in my throat. I looked at the painting. I saw Hans shivering in his loft, wrapping this canvas in old newspapers to give to me. He had given me a fortune, and I had kept it in a basement next to a broken exercise bike. "This is a conservative starting bid," the director said. "Given the rarity of the Chaos series and the current market interest in post-war German expressionism, we expect a bidding war." "A bidding war," I repeated. "Yes," she said. "We have already contacted our top-tier collectors. There is significant interest from a museum in Berlin and a private collector in Tokyo." I ran my hand over the smooth leather of the chair. I thought about the $50 bill Gavin had thrown on the floor. I thought about the receipt tucked in my Bible. "When does it happen?" I asked. "Tomorrow night," she said. "It will be the highlight of our Modern Masters evening. We have arranged a seat for you in the front row, but Mr. Freeman, you should know something." "What is that?" I asked. "Buzz has already started leaking," she said. "The art world is small. Rumors of a lost Weber resurfacing are trending on the specialized forums. People are talking." I smiled. Let them talk. Back in Chicago, the party was winding down. The cheap print had probably sold for $100 to some pitying neighbor who wanted to help Gavin save face. Gavin was likely feeling triumphant. He had cleared the house. He had cleared his conscience. He was drinking the last of the wine and checking his phone. And that was when the first crack in his reality would appear. I imagined Gavin standing in the kitchen, loosening his tie. He pulls out his phone to check the stock market or his sports bets, but instead he sees a notification. Maybe it is from a business news app. Maybe it is a forwarded article from one of his pretensions friends who likes to pretend they know about art. "Lost Hans Weber masterpiece discovered in Chicago. Valuation estimates exceed $4 million. Gavin would freeze. The glass would stop halfway to his mouth. He would read the headline again. Chicago, Hans Weber. He would laugh. A short, nervous bark of a laugh. No, he would mutter to the empty kitchen. Impossible. He would think about the painting he had just sold for peanuts. He would think about the dirty canvas he had kicked. It was just a copy, he would tell himself loud enough for the walls to hear. The old man said it was a copy. I have the receipt. He admitted it was a fake. He would swipe the screen frantically looking for pictures. But the auction house had not released the image yet. Only the description. A large format oil on canvas characterized by violent blue and gray strokes titled The Chaos of Silence. Gavin would feel a cold drop of sweat slide down his spine. The description was too familiar, but he would fight the fear. He was Gavin Thorne. He was smarter than an old black soldier. He was smarter than a senile invalid. It is a coincidence, he would say, pouring more wine. Lots of paintings look like that. Bernard S. was trash. Everyone said so. Chad said so. He would drink the wine in one gulp, trying to wash away the doubt. He did not know that the receipt he held the paper he thought was his shield was actually the sword that would cut him down. He had signed away his claim to the reproduction. He had never owned the original. I sat in the quiet room in New York and watched the dust motes dance in the light of the masterpiece. You called me a fool, Gavin, I whispered to the empty air. You called me garbage. I stood up. My knee clicked, but I did not wince. Tomorrow night the world would see the garbage. And you, Gavin, you will be watching. I will make sure of it. I turned to the director. One more thing, I said. Yes, Mr. Freeman. I want to send an invitation, I said. A VIP invitation to the online stream of the auction. I want it sent to a specific email address. Certainly, she said, taking out her pen. Who is the recipient? His name is Gavin Thorne, I said, savoring the syllables. And make sure the subject line reads concerning the trash in the basement. The director looked up surprised, but she saw the look in my eyes. She saw the steel. Consider it done, she said. I walked out of the auction house into the cool New York night. The city was alive with noise and sirens, but inside me there was only silence, the calm before the strike. The chess pieces were all in position. The king was about to fall, and he would not even see it coming until the ground opened up beneath his feet. The silence in the townhouse was different now. It was not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of a bomb waiting to detonate. I was 500 miles away in a hotel room in New York City, but I knew exactly what the air felt like in that kitchen in Chicago. I had access to the security cameras Gavin had installed to watch the staff. Now I was using them to watch the rats scurrying in the maze. Gavin sat at the granite island, his head in his hands. The charity auction at the house had been a humiliation. The guests had come, drank his wine, and eaten his food, but nobody had bid on the painting. Why would they? It was a flat, lifeless print that smelled of factory chemicals. Gavin had tried to spin it. He had tried to tell them it was avant-garde. But the wealthy are not stupid. They smelled desperation on him like cheap cologne. Now the creditors were calling. I saw him decline 3 calls in the span of 5 minutes. His face was gray. He poured whiskey into a coffee mug because he was too shaking to hold a crystal glass. He was trapped. The loan sharks he owed money to were not the kind of men who accepted excuses. They wanted their $500,000. Then his phone chimed. I watched on the grainy black and white video feed as he picked it up. I saw his eyes widen. I saw him sit up straight. It was the email I had instructed the auction house to send. Subject VIP, invitation, Modern Masters Auction, New York City. The body of the email was crafted perfectly to stroke his ego. It invited Mr. Gavin Thorne, a noted collector and philanthropist, to an exclusive evening of high-stakes bidding. It hinted that serious investors from Europe would be present. It hinted that this was where the real money was hiding. Gavin stood up. He paced the kitchen. He ran his hand through his hair. I could see the gears turning in his mind. He thought this was his salvation. He thought that if he could just get into that room, if he could just rub shoulders with the billionaires, he could charm someone into investing in his dying company. He could get the money to pay off the sharks. He did not know he was being invited to his own execution. He needed money to get there. He needed a flight. He needed a hotel. He needed a suit that did not look like he bought it at a mall. I saw him leave the kitchen and head up the stairs. I switched the camera view to the hallway. He marched toward the master bedroom. Alicia was in there. I could not see her, but I could hear her voice through the audio feed. She sounded tired. Gavin, please, not that money, she pleaded. That is the emergency fund. That is all we have left. I need it, Alicia. Gavin shouted, his voice distorted by the microphone. You do not understand business. You have to spend money to make money. This invitation is a golden ticket. There will be German investors there, real ones. Not like those tourists who came to the house. But Gavin, that is for the mortgage, Alicia cried. If we miss another payment, the bank will foreclose. The bank can wait, Gavin roared. This is my chance. Do you want to be homeless? Do you want to live on the street like your father? Or do you want me to go out there and fix this mess? There was a silence. Then I heard the sound of a drawer opening. I closed my eyes in my hotel room. My heart ached for my daughter. She was handing over her safety net to a man who had already cut the ropes. She was giving him the last of her dignity. I am doing this for us. Gavin said, his voice softer now, manipulating her. Trust me. I will come back with a check that will solve everything. He walked out of the bedroom clutching a stack of cash and a credit card. He looked manic. He looked like a man who believed his own lies. He booked a last-minute flight. He rented a tuxedo from a high-end shop downtown because his own suits were too tight from stress eating. He spent money he did not have to impress people he did not know. I turned off the laptop. I walked to the window and looked out at the New York skyline. The city was shining with a million lights. Somewhere out there in the dark, Gavin was flying toward me. He was flying toward the truth. The next evening, the auction house was a fortress of luxury. The air was cold and smelled of expensive perfume and anticipation. Security guards in black suits stood at every door. The lobby was filled with people who owned islands and private jets. They spoke in hushed tones, discussing market trends and tax havens. I stood on the balcony overlooking the main hall. I was wearing a tuxedo that I had bought with the advance form the auction house. It was midnight blue silk, tailored to hide my stoop and accentuate my broad shoulders. I held a cane, not the cheap aluminum one from the drugstore, but a hand-carved ebony stick with a silver handle. I checked my watch. The doors had just opened. Gavin walked in. He looked out of place immediately. The tuxedo he had rented was expensive, but it did not fit him right. The sleeves were a fraction too long. The collar was too tight. He was sweating. He looked around the room with wide, hungry eyes. He was searching for a lifeline. He grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and downed it in one gulp. He adjusted his bow tie. He put on his salesman's smile. I watched him approach a group of Japanese businessmen. He tried to insert himself into their conversation. I saw them turn, slightly closing the circle, shutting him out. He bounced off them like a moth hitting a window pane. He tried again with a couple from France. He laughed too loud at something they said. The woman looked at him with polite confusion and steered her husband away. Gavin was drowning in the open air. He was realizing that money is not just about cash, it is about belonging. And he did not belong. He retreated to the bar. He ordered a double scotch. His hands were shaking. He pulled out his phone, probably checking to see if the loan sharks had sent any more threats. Then the chime sounded. The auction was about to begin. Please take your seats, the announcer said, his voice smooth as velvet. The crowd moved toward the main bidding floor. It was a theater of commerce. Rows of velvet chairs faced a raised stage where the art would be displayed. Gavin moved with the herd. He looked for a seat. He tried to sit in the third row, but a usher stopped him. I am sorry, sir, the usher whispered. These seats are reserved for gold paddle holders. Your ticket is for the standing room at the back. Gavin's face flushed red. He argued for a moment, pointing at his chest, mouthing the words, I am a VIP. The usher did not budge. Gavin was forced to retreat to the back of the room behind the velvet rope. He stood there humiliated among the assistants and the interns. I descended the private staircase from the balcony. I walked slowly, my cane tapping a steady rhythm on the marble floor. The crowd parted for me. They did not know who I was, but they knew I belonged. I walked with the weight of history. I walked with the confidence of a man who held the ace of spades. I approached the front row. The seat of honor was waiting for me. It was right in the center, directly in front of the podium. I sat down. I placed my cane against the armrest. I did not turn around. I did not look back at the standing room. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the podium. Gavin stood at the back of the room, craning his neck. He was angry. He was humiliated. He was looking for someone to blame. He looked at the back of my head. He must have frowned. The shape of my shoulders was familiar. The gray hair cut close to the scalp was familiar, but the context was wrong. The Bernard he knew was a cripple in a basement wearing stained sweatpants. The man in the front row was a king. "It cannot be," he must have whispered. I felt his gaze burning into my back. I could feel his confusion turning into denial. The auctioneer stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Modern Masters evening. We have a very special surprise to open the night. Lot number 1. The curtains behind the podium parted. 2 handlers wearing white gloves carried out a large covered canvas. Gavin took a step forward, pushing against the velvet rope. He knew that shape. He knew those dimensions. "Tonight we present a rediscovered masterpiece," the auctioneer said. "A work thought to be lost for 40 years. From the private collection of Mr. Bernard Freeman." Gavin dropped his glass. It shattered on the floor, but nobody heard it over the gasp of the crowd. The name echoed in the hall. Bernard Freeman. I slowly turned my head. I looked over my shoulder. I looked past the billionaires and the collectors. I looked past the security guards. My eyes locked onto Gavin standing in the shadows at the back of the room. He was pale. He looked like he had seen a ghost. His mouth hung open. I did not smile. I did not wave. I just looked at him with cold, hard recognition. Then I turned back to the stage. The handlers pulled off the cover. The chaos of silence was revealed. The blue and gray strokes exploded under the stage lights. It was magnificent. It was powerful. And for the first time, Gavin Thorne saw it not as trash, but as the most expensive thing he had ever thrown away. "The bidding will start at $2 million, the auctioneer said. I heard a choke from the back of the room. It was the sound of a man realizing that he had just bought a ticket to watch his own funeral. I felt his hand on my shoulder before I heard his voice. It was a heavy and trembling grip. The grip of a man who was trying to convince himself that he was still in charge. I sat perfectly still in the front row. The velvet of the chair was soft against my back, but my spine was steel. I did not flinch. I did not jump. I simply let him touch me. I let him make the mistake of initiating contact. "Excuse me," Gavin hissed. His voice was a wet whisper right in my ear. "You are in the wrong seat. The staff entrance is in the back." He still did not believe it was me. His brain was rejecting the evidence of his eyes. He saw the back of my head. He saw the set of my shoulders. He recognized the scar on my neck from an old shrapnel wound. But he could not reconcile the image of Bernard the basement dweller with Bernard the VIP. So he invented a story. In his mind, I was just a waiter or a janitor who had stolen a tuxedo and snuck into the front row. He thought he was busting me. He thought he was going to drag me out by my collar and save the day. I took a slow breath. I smelled the cheap gin on his breath. It cut through the expensive perfume of the woman sitting next to me. "Turn around," he demanded, his fingers digging into my tuxedo jacket. "Look at me when I am talking to you." He wanted a confrontation. He wanted to see the fear in my eyes. He wanted to see me apologize and shuffle away. He was addicted to my submission. He needed it to feed his starving ego. I tightened my grip on the silver handle of my cane. I planted my feet firmly on the floor. "I am not the staff, Gavin," I said. My voice was low. It was calm, and it was speaking English. Gavin froze. His hand went limp on my shoulder, but he did not pull it away. He recognized the voice. It was the voice that had said good morning to him for 5 years. It was the voice that had asked for pain medication 2 days ago. "Bernard," he whispered. The word came out like a curse. I slowly rotated my upper body. I did not rush. I moved with the deliberate grace of a predator revealing itself in the tall grass. I turned until I was looking him directly in the face. Gavin looked terrible. His face was pale and slick with sweat. His eyes were bloodshot. The rented tuxedo was straining at the buttons. He looked like a boy who had put on his father's clothes and gotten lost in a casino. He stared at me. He stared at the silk lapels of my jacket. He stared at the diamond cufflinks catching the light. He stared at the way I looked at him, not with fear, but with absolute crushing pity. "What are you doing here?" he stammered. "How did you get in? This is a private event." He looked around, expecting security to descend on me. He expected the world to correct this error, but nobody moved. The billionaire to my left was sipping champagne. The countess to my right was checking her program. I belonged here. Gavin was the intruder. I adjusted my cuff. I smoothed the fabric of my sleeve where his sweaty hand had wrinkled it. I was invited, I said, just like you, Gavin. No! He shook his head rapidly. No, you have no money. You have nothing. You are homeless. I kicked you out. You did not kick me out, I corrected him gently. I left, and before I left, I took out the trash. Gavin blinked. He did not understand. He was still processing the visual shock. He was not ready for the auditory one. I leaned in closer. I wanted only him to hear this. I wanted this moment to be intimate. Just family. I looked him dead in the eye. I summoned the rhythm of the language I had buried for 40 years, the language of my youth, the language of the city where I learned to survive. Gavin, deine Krawatte ist schief und du riechst nach Angst. I spoke the German words perfectly. My accent was not the clumsy tourist garble Gavin used. It was the sharp, clipped dialect of West Berlin. It was the sound of the streets. Gavin, deine Krawatte ist schief und du riechst nach Angst. Gavin, your tie is crooked and you smell like fear. Gavin recoiled as if I had slapped him. He stumbled back a step, bumping into the legs of a woman in the second row. She gasped and pulled her dress away from him. What did you say? He breathed. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. I said, your tie is crooked, I repeated in English. And then I switched back to German effortlessly. Und der Müll, von dem du gesprochen hast. Ist im Begriff, dich zu vernichten. And the trash you talked about. It is about to destroy you. Gavin's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. His brain was misfiring. He was replaying the last 3 years of his life in a single second. He was remembering every time he had insulted me in German. Every time he had called me stupid. Every time he had called me a burden. Every time he had laughed with his friends thinking I was just a piece of furniture. You knew, he whispered. The horror was dawning on him. You understood. Everything, every word, Gavin, I said, every single word. I heard you call me a parasite. I heard you call my wife's memory a joke. I heard you call my painting garbage. Gavin's knees buckled. He grabbed the back of my chair to steady himself. His face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. But you smiled, he said, his voice cracking. You nodded. You poured the wine. I was waiting, I said. A soldier knows when to shoot Gavin, and a soldier knows when to wait. I reached out and brushed a piece of lint off his cheap lapel. And now, Gavin, I said softly, the waiting is over. Gavin looked terrified. He looked at me like I was a monster. He had created a monster in his own basement, and now it had come upstairs to eat him. He tried to speak again. He wanted to demand answers. He wanted to scream. But the room suddenly went dark. The house lights plunged into blackness, leaving only the murmurs of the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, the amplified voice of the auctioneer boomed through the hall, cutting off Gavin's escape. Please take your seats. The auction is about to commence. Gavin was trapped. He could not run. He was standing in the aisle, exposed and vulnerable. A security guard stepped out of the shadows and firmly guided him to the standing area at the side of the room. Gavin went limply. He kept looking back at me. His eyes were wide and pleading. He wanted me to tell him it was a joke. He wanted me to tell him this was a dream. I turned my back on him. I faced the stage. The spotlight hit the center of the podium with a violent snap. It was a circle of pure white light in the darkness. 2 handlers in white gloves walked out. They carried the large canvas covered in a black velvet cloth. Welcome to the Modern Masters collection, the auctioneer said. He was a man with a British accent that sounded like it cost money. Tonight we begin with a truly exceptional discovery. A piece that has been the subject of whispers and rumors for decades. I could hear Gavin breathing from 10 feet away. It was a ragged, gasping sound. He knew the size of that canvas. He knew the shape of that frame. Lot number 1, the auctioneer announced. From the private collection of Mr. Bernard Freeman. He gestured to me. The spotlight swung briefly to my seat. I did not stand up. I just inclined my head slightly, acknowledging the room. The crowd applauded politely. They saw a distinguished collector. Gavin saw his executioner. The spotlight snapped back to the stage. We present to you the lost masterpiece of the Chaos series by Hans Weber. The handlers pulled the cord. The black velvet fell away. The painting was revealed. It was not the dusty thing in the basement. Under the professional gallery lighting, the colors sang. The blues were electric. The grays were deep and mournful. The texture of the paint was 3-dimensional, casting tiny shadows that made the image seem to move. It was violence and beauty wrapped in a wooden frame. I heard a sound from the side of the room. It was a high-pitched whimper. Gavin was staring at the stage. He was gripping the velvet rope that separated him from the rich people. His knuckles were white. He recognized it. He recognized the scratch on the bottom left corner where he had kicked it. He recognized the chipped paint on the top right where Chad had banged it against the wall. It was the trash. It was the garbage he had sold for $50. But up there on the stage, it did not look like garbage. It looked like a god. The auctioneer consulted his notes. This work, titled "The Chaos of Silence," is a seminal example of post-war German expressionism. It is pristine, unrestored, and completely fresh to the market. Gavin looked at me. I could feel his gaze burning a hole in the side of my head. He was doing the math. He was realizing that the paper he signed the receipt he had laughed at was his death warrant. He had sold a copy, but the auction house was selling the original. "We will start the bidding," the auctioneer said, looking around the room. I leaned forward in my chair. I gripped my cane. "Shall we open the bidding at $2 million? $2 million. The words hung in the air. I heard a thud. I did not look, but I knew what it was. Gavin Thorne. The man who thought he ruled the world had just dropped to his knees on the carpet. He was watching $2 million float away from him, and the night had only just begun. I smiled at the painting. Hans, old friend, I thought, let us show them what silence sounds like when it finally screams. The air in the room was thin. It was the kind of atmosphere where breathing felt like a disturbance. I sat in the front row with my hands resting on the silver handle of my cane. My heart was beating a slow and steady rhythm against my ribs. It was the rhythm of a sniper who has waited 3 days in the mud for a single clear shot. I was not looking at the stage. I was not looking at the painting that glowed under the spotlights. I was listening. I was listening for the sound of a soul breaking apart in the back of the room. The auctioneer adjusted his glasses. He looked out at the sea of faces with the calm authority of a captain steering a ship through a storm. "We have an opening bid of $500,000, he announced. $500,000. That was the exact amount Gavin owed to the loan sharks. That was the debt that was drowning him. That was the reason he had stolen my house and cut my medication. I heard a sharp intake of breath from behind me. It was a wet, ragged sound. Gavin was doing the math. He was realizing that the canvas he had kicked in the basement was worth his entire freedom. $600,000 to the lady in the front, $700,000 on the phone, $800,000. The numbers were flying now. They were not just numbers, they were bullets. Each increment was a physical blow to the man standing behind the velvet rope. $1 million. The words hung in the air like smoke. $1 million. That was the value of the townhouse Gavin had forced me to sign over. That was the price of his greed. I turned my head slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse of him in my peripheral vision. Gavin was gripping the velvet rope with both hands. His face was a mask of terror. He was sweating. I could see the moisture glistening on his forehead under the house lights. His eyes were darting back and forth between the bidders as if he could stop them with his glare. $1,200,000. $1,500,000. The bidding war had begun. The representative from the Berlin Museum was raising his paddle with mechanical precision. A private collector from Tokyo was countering him instantly. They were fighting for the privilege of owning my pain. They were fighting for the chaos I had lived through. Gavin was shaking. I could see the tremors running through his body. He was looking at the painting. He was really looking at it for the first time. He saw the heavy impasto of the blue paint. He saw the violent gray swirls. And then he saw it. I knew the exact moment he saw it. His eyes locked onto the bottom left corner of the frame. There was a small indentation there, a scratch in the wood. It was the mark his expensive Italian leather shoe had made when he kicked the painting in the basement 3 nights ago. He knew that mark. He had made that mark. The realization hit him like a physical slap. This was not a similar painting. This was not another work by the same artist. This was the exact physical object he had held in his hands. This was the object he had called trash. This was the object he had sold to himself for $50. $1,800,000, the auctioneer chanted. Do I hear $2 million? $2 million from the gentleman in the back. The price had quadrupled the debt Gavin owed. It was enough money to retire. It was enough money to disappear. And it was slipping through his fingers like sand. Gavin let out a noise. It was a low moan that rose in pitch. It sounded like an animal caught in a trap. People in the back rows turned to look at him. They saw a man in an ill-fitting tuxedo unraveling in real time. 2,200,000. 2,500,000. The numbers were becoming abstract. They were becoming too large to comprehend. But for Gavin, they were very real. Every 100,000 was another nail in his coffin. He started to move. He pushed against the velvet rope. The security guard stepped forward, but Gavin shoved him aside with a strength born of pure panic. "Stop," he hissed. Nobody heard him over the murmur of the crowd. 2,800,000! Going once! Stop it! Gavin screamed. The scream tore through the room, shattering the decorum of the event. Silence fell instantly. Every head turned. The auctioneer froze with his gavel in midair. Gavin stumbled into the aisle. He looked wild. His bow tie was undone. His hair was plastered to his forehead. He pointed a shaking finger at the stage. "That is mine," he yelled. "That painting is mine." He ran down the aisle toward the front. He looked at the painting with a mix of hunger and hatred. "Stop the bidding," Gavin shouted, his voice cracking. "You cannot sell that. It belongs to me. I have the receipt. I bought it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It was not the receipt. It was a cocktail napkin. He realized his mistake and frantically patted his other pocket, searching for the proof that did not exist. "I bought it for $50, he raved. "He sold it to me. The old man sold it to me." He pointed at me. "Him," Gavin screamed. "He is a fraud. He is senile. He does not know what he is doing. That is my property." I did not stand up. I did not turn around. I sat in my chair like a statue. I let the room see him. I let them see the contrast. On one side, a distinguished gentleman sitting in silence. On the other, a raving lunatic screaming about $50 in a room where people were spending millions. Security was moving now. 3 large men in black suits were closing in on him from the sides of the room. Gavin saw them coming. He lunged toward me. "Bernard, tell them," he pleaded, his anger turning instantly to begging. "Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them we have a deal. You signed the paper, Bernard. You signed it." He reached for me. His hand was inches from my shoulder. A security guard tackled him. It was not a gentle restraint. The guard hit him low, grabbing him around the waist and driving him away from the seated guests. Gavin hit the carpet with a heavy thud. "Get off me," Gavin shrieked. "Do you know who I am? I am Gavin Thorne. I own that painting." 2 more guards descended on him. They pulled his arms behind his back. They hauled him to his feet. He was kicking and thrashing, his expensive shoes scuffing the floor. "Get him out of here," the auctioneer said, his voice cold and disgusted. They began to drag him backward. Gavin dug his heels in. He looked at me one last time. His eyes were wide with betrayal. He truly believed he was the victim. He truly believed that I had stolen from him by refusing to be robbed. "Bernard, help me," he cried. "Dad, please." I slowly turned my head. I looked at him. I looked at the son-in-law who had mocked my language. I looked at the man who had hurt my daughter. I raised my hand. I did not wave. I simply adjusted my glasses and turned back to the stage. The doors at the back of the hall burst open. The guards threw him out. I heard his voice fading into the lobby, screaming about lawsuits and receipts until the heavy doors swung shut, cutting off the noise. The room was silent again. The shock hung in the air. The auctioneer cleared his throat. He was a professional. He knew that the show must go on, and he knew that scandal only drives prices higher. "We apologize for the interruption," the auctioneer said, smoothing his tie. "It appears we have a passionate admirer of Mr. Weber's work. However, let us return to business. We were at 2,800,000. A hand went up in the front row. It was the representative from the Berlin Museum. He looked determined. He wanted to save the painting from the chaos he had just witnessed. $3 million, he said clearly. 3,200,000, the voice came from the phone bank. The Tokyo collector was not giving up. 3,400,000. 3,500,000. The room was buzzing again. The energy was frantic. Gavin's outburst had reminded everyone that this was not just canvas and oil. This was passion. This was madness. This was valuable. $3,600,000, the Berlin representative said. He held his paddle high. He looked at the auctioneer. He looked at me. He nodded respectfully. The auctioneer looked around the room. "Do I hear 3,007,000? Silence. Going once at 3,600,000. Going twice. I closed my eyes. I thought of the basement. I thought of the cold cot. I thought of the $50 bill lying on the concrete floor. Sold, the auctioneer shouted. The gavel came down. Bang! The sound was sharper than a gunshot. It was the sound of a judge passing sentence. $3,600,000 to the Museum of Berlin. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Applause broke out. It was polite and enthusiastic. People were turning to me, smiling, clapping, congratulating the lucky owner. I sat there while the waves of applause washed over me. I felt a profound sense of exhaustion. It was over. The trap had sprung. The wolf was caught. I stood up slowly. I took my cane. I bowed slightly to the auctioneer. I walked up the aisle. I walked past the spot where Gavin had been tackled. The carpet was still rumpled. I walked out of the hall and into the lobby. Through the glass doors of the main entrance, I could see the street outside. A police cruiser was parked at the curb with its lights flashing. Gavin was there. He was handcuffed. He was leaning against the hood of the police car. His tuxedo was torn. His face was dirty. He looked like a broken doll. He saw me coming through the doors. He straightened up, trying to salvage some shred of dignity. "You planned this," he shouted through the glass. "You set me up." I pushed the door open and stepped out into the cool night air. I walked past him. I did not stop. "You sold me a copy, Gavin," I said without looking at him. "You have the receipt. Remember." But the money, Gavin yelled, pulling against the handcuffs. "The $3 million. It is mine. I fed you. I housed you. The money belongs to the owner of the painting," I said, signaling for my car. "And since you only bought the reproduction, the money belongs to me." The valet pulled up in the black town car I had hired. He opened the door for me. "Where to, Mr. Freeman?" the driver asked. "Take me to the bank." I said loud enough for Gavin to hear. "I have a deposit to make." "And then take me to a German restaurant. I feel like celebrating." I got into the car. As we pulled away, I looked in the rearview mirror. Gavin was kicking the police car, screaming at the sky. He looked small. He looked insignificant. He looked like exactly what he was. A man who had traded a diamond for a grain of sand because he was too arrogant to turn on the light. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. It was a sterile scent that I associated with bureaucracy and waiting. I sat at the defendant table next to Harper. She was wearing a navy blue suit that looked like armor. Her posture was straight and her eyes were focused on the judge. I sat with my hands folded in my lap. My cane leaned against the table leg. To the casual observer, I looked like a tired old man who had been dragged into a confusion he did not understand. But inside, I was alert. I was counting the heartbeats. I was watching the enemy across the aisle. Gavin sat with his lawyer, a man with slicked back hair and a suit that was too shiny. Gavin looked better than he had at the auction. He had shaved and put on a fresh shirt. He was trying to project the image of a wronged businessman. He was trying to look like the victim of a senile old man's treachery. But I could see his leg bouncing under the table. I could see the way he chewed on the inside of his cheek. He was terrified. He was suing me for $3.6 million, and he knew that if he lost, he would leave this room in handcuffs. The judge entered. She was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose and a face that had seen every lie humanity had to offer. She sat down and opened the file. "Mr. Thorne, you are the plaintiff," the judge said. "Please state your case." Gavin stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He put on his most sincere voice. "Your Honor," he began, "this is a simple case of breach of contract. 2 weeks ago, I entered into a verbal and written agreement with my father-in-law, Bernard Freeman. I agreed to purchase a painting from him for the sum of $50. He accepted the money. He signed the bill of sale." Gavin paused for effect. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and condescension. "Mr. Freeman is getting on in years," Gavin continued, lowering his voice. "His memory is not what it used to be. I believe he simply forgot that he sold the item to me. But a deal is a deal. When that painting sold at auction for millions, that money legally belonged to me. He stole my property and sold it behind my back." Gavin's lawyer stood up and handed a piece of paper to the bailiff. "Exhibit A," the lawyer said, "the bill of sale signed by Bernard Freeman." The bailiff handed the paper to the judge. She adjusted her glasses and read it. The room was silent. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Gavin was smiling. It was a small, tight smile. He thought he had won. He thought that a piece of paper with my signature was a magic spell that would give him everything he wanted. The judge looked up. "Mr. Freeman, do you recognize this signature?" she asked. I stood up slowly. I leaned on my cane. "Yes, Your Honor," I said clearly. "That is my signature." Gavin let out a breath of relief. He slumped back in his chair looking triumphant. But I continued. "I would like my counsel to address the content of that document." I sat down. Harper stood up. Sat down. Harper. She did not walk to the center of the room. She stayed by my side like a guard dog. "Your Honor." Harper said, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "Mr. Thorne is correct. A contract was signed. Money was exchanged. However, we are not disputing the validity of the sale. We are disputing the identity of the items sold." Harper picked up a copy of the receipt. "Please read the text carefully, Your Honor," she said. "It says clearly, 'I hereby purchase the decorative reproduction painting from Bernard Freeman.'" Gavin scoffed loud enough for the back row to hear. "It is just semantics," he whispered to his lawyer. Harper ignored him. "Mr. Thorne purchased a reproduction," Harper said. "He paid $50 for a reproduction. And if he goes to the basement of the townhouse right now, he will find exactly what he bought. A $40 canvas print of a generic abstract painting standing against the wall." Gavin stood up, his face turning red. "That is a lie," he shouted. "He switched them. He tricked me." "Sit down, Mr. Thorne," the judge snapped. Harper walked to the evidence table. She placed a thick folder on the wood. "We have sworn affidavits from the auction house," Harper said. "The painting that sold for $3.6 million was authenticated as the original Hans Weber. It has been in Mr. Freeman's possession since 1978. Furthermore, we have forensic video evidence from the security cameras Mr. Thorne himself installed in the house." Gavin went pale. He had forgotten about the cameras. He had forgotten that he was the one who insisted on surveillance to watch the maids. Harper pulled out a tablet. "This footage is from the night before the sale," she said. She pressed play. The screen showed me in the basement. It showed me wrapping the real painting in black plastic. It showed me placing the cheap print against the wall and covering it with the drop cloth. "This was 12 hours before Mr. Thorne forced my client to sign that receipt," Harper said. "When Mr. Thorne handed over that $50, the original painting was already in the trunk of Mr. Freeman's car. Mr. Thorne negotiated for the object in the basement. The object in the basement was a fake. He bought a fake. He owns a fake. The original never entered the transaction. The logic was brutal and inescapable. Gavin had bought the object he pointed at. That object was a print. The real masterpiece was never on the table." Gavin looked at his lawyer. His lawyer was closing his briefcase. The lawyer knew it was over. "But I thought it was trash," Gavin stammered. "I thought they were the same thing." "Your ignorance of art is not a legal defense for claiming $3 million, Harper said coldly. "You signed a contract for a reproduction. You got a reproduction. The plaintiff has no claim to the proceeds of the auction." The judge nodded. She closed the file. "The court finds in favor of the defendant," she ruled. "Mr. Thorne, your claim is dismissed with prejudice. You are ordered to pay all legal fees for Mr. Freeman." Gavin looked like he had been punched in the stomach. He sat frozen in his chair. He had lost the money. He had lost the lawsuit. He was ruined. But we were not done. Harper looked at the judge. "Your Honor, there is one more matter," she said. "During the discovery process for this trial, we uncovered evidence of a more serious nature." Gavin looked up. His eyes were wide with panic. "What evidence?" he whispered. Harper held up a flash drive. "Mr. Thorne claimed that he was a loving caregiver to his father-in-law," Harper said. "He claimed that Mr. Freeman was senile and confused. However, the audio recordings from inside the home tell a different story." She looked at the bailiff. "Please play file number 3. The sound of Gavin's voice filled the courtroom. It was the recording I had made on my burner phone the night he shoved me. "You do not give orders here, Bernard. I own you. I own this house. I own the clothes on your back." Then the sound of a scuffle. The sound of a body hitting the floor. The sound of me groaning in pain. "Look what you made me do, Bernard. You make me the bad guy. Get up. Stop being dramatic." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. The stenographer stopped typing. The judge's face hardened into stone. She looked at Gavin not as a litigant, but as a criminal. "This recording was made on the night Mr. Freeman sought emergency medical treatment for a dislocated shoulder," Harper said. "Mr. Thorne claimed it was a fall. The audio suggests it was assault. Furthermore, we have recordings of Mr. Thorne canceling Mr. Freeman's prescription medication and admitting to financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult." Gavin stood up, knocking his chair over. That is out of context, he screamed. He provoked me. He is crazy. Sit down, the judge ordered, her voice booming. I did not sit down. I stood up. I walked to the center of the aisle. I looked at Gavin. I am not crazy, Gavin, I said, my voice steady and strong. And I am not a burden. I am the man who documented every time you threatened me. I am the man who saved every receipt you threw away. You thought I was silent because I was weak. I was silent because I was building your cage. The judge turned to the bailiff. Take Mr. Thorne into custody, she said. Gavin's eyes bulged. Custody for what? He shrieked. This is civil court. You cannot arrest me. Based on the evidence presented, I am holding you in contempt and referring this matter immediately to the district attorney for charges of elder abuse, assault, and grand larceny, the judge said. Bailiff, do your duty. The two officers moved in. Gavin tried to back away. He looked for an exit, but there was only the wall. No, please, he cried. Alicia, tell them. Call my wife. Alicia was not there. I had told her not to come. I wanted to spare her the sight of her husband being dragged away. The officers grabbed Gavin's arms. They spun him around. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Click, click. It was the sound of the end. Gavin struggled. He looked at me with tears streaming down his face. Bernard, he begged, I am sorry. I will give you the house back. Just tell them to stop. I looked at him. I leaned on my cane. I remembered the basement. I remembered the cold. I remembered the $50 bill on the floor. You cannot give me the house, Gavin, I said. You do not own it anymore. The bank does. And as for the rest, I turned my back on him. You should have learned German, I said over my shoulder. Then you would have known that the word for goodbye is auf Wiedersehen. I walked out of the courtroom. I heard Gavin screaming my name as they dragged him through the side door to the holding cells. I walked out into the hallway where the sunlight was streaming through the high windows. Harper walked beside me. She put a hand on my arm. Are you okay, Bernard? She asked. I took a deep breath. My shoulder ached a little, but my knees felt lighter than they had in years. I am better than okay, Harper, I said. I am free. We walked toward the exit. The legal battle was over. The money was safe. The predator was in a cage. But there was one last thing to do. One last loose end to tie up before I could truly start my new life. I had to face the one person who had watched it all happen and done nothing. I had to face my daughter. My hotel suite at the Ritz-Carlton was quiet. It was the kind of silence that cost $1,000 a night. I sat by the window watching the rain fall on the city streets below. It was the same rain that had soaked me 3 nights ago when I left my home, but now it looked different. It looked like a cleansing. It looked like a baptism. I took a sip of Earl Grey tea from a bone china cup and listened to the soft jazz playing in the background. My knees were warm. My shoulder was healing. My bank account was full. I had everything a man could want except for the one thing that money cannot buy. I did not have a family. Then came the knock on the door. I knew who it was. I had instructed the concierge to let her up. I wanted this meeting. I needed this closure. I stood up and walked to the door. I checked my reflection in the mirror. The tuxedo was gone, replaced by a cashmere sweater and dark trousers. I looked like a grandfather. I looked like the man I used to be before Gavin Thorne turned me into a ghost. I opened the door. Alicia stood there. She looked like a shipwreck. Her hair was wet and plastered to her skull. Her designer coat was soaked through. Her eyes were red and swollen, almost shut from crying. She was trembling, not from the cold, but from the terror of a woman who has watched her entire world dissolve in 24 hours. "Daddy," she choked out. She threw herself at me. She wrapped her wet arms around my neck and buried her face in my chest. She smelled of rain and desperation. "Daddy, please. You have to help us." I did not hug her back. I stood with my arms at my sides like a statue. I let her cry. I let her soak my expensive sweater with her tears. I waited for the sobbing to subside. I waited for the pitch to turn from sorrow to begging. "It is a nightmare, Daddy," she wept, pulling back to look at me. "They took him. They took Gavin. The police came to the house this morning. They put him in a cell with criminals. He is terrified. He is calling for you." I walked back into the room, leaving the door open. Alicia followed me, stumbling a little in her heels. She looked around the suite. She saw the fresh flowers. She saw the fruit basket. She saw the luxury she had denied me. Daddy, we need bail money, she said, her voice rising in panic. The judge set it at $100,000. Our accounts are frozen. The bank locked everything because of the lawsuit. We have nothing. You have the money from the painting. Please, just pay the bail. We can work this out. We can be a family again. She reached for my hand. Her fingers were cold. He is sorry, Daddy. He is so sorry. He made a mistake. He was stressed. The business was failing. He did not mean to hurt you. He loves you. Deep down, he loves you. I looked at her hand on mine. I looked at the manicure I had paid for when I still had access to my pension. I looked at the diamond ring Gavin had bought her with money he stole from the house equity. He loves me, I repeated, my voice flat. Yes, she nodded frantically. He does. We all do. Please, Daddy, don't let him rot in there. He is my husband. He is your son. I pulled my hand away. I did not do it violently. I did it slowly, like I was removing a leech. Sit down, Alicia, I said. She sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, perching nervously. She wiped her eyes with a tissue, looking up at me with the expectant eyes of a child who thinks her father can fix anything. Daddy, she whispered. I sat in the armchair opposite her. I crossed my legs. I looked at her. I really looked at her. I looked for the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders. I looked for the teenager I taught to drive. I looked for the young woman I walked down the aisle. I could not find her. All I saw was a stranger in wet clothes. You say he loves me, I said quietly. You say he made a mistake. Yes, Alicia cried. It was just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, I said, testing the word. Was it a misunderstanding when he called me garbage in German? Was it a misunderstanding when he moved me into the basement? Was it a misunderstanding when he canceled my pain medication because it cost $40? Alicia flinched. She looked down at her lap. He was under pressure, she mumbled. You do not know what it is like, Daddy. The investors, the debt. I know exactly what it is like, I said, cutting her off. I was in a war, Alicia. I had bullets flying over my head. I had men dying in my arms. I was under pressure every single day of my life for 3 years. And do you know what I never did? I never kicked a helpless old man. I never stole from my family. I never called a human being trash. Alicia began to sob again. But Daddy, please, stop crying, I said. My voice was not loud, but it had the weight of iron. Stop crying and listen to me. She went silent, choking back a sob. You are asking me to save him, I said. You are asking me to use the money from the painting to buy his freedom. Yes, she whispered. Please. I leaned forward. Where were you, Alicia? I asked. She looked confused. What? Where were you when he moved my things to the basement? I asked. Where were you when he told the guests I was senile? Where were you when he shoved me in the living room and dislocated my shoulder? I was scared, she stammered. No, I said. You were not scared. You were comfortable. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the city. You liked the lifestyle, Alicia, I said, without turning around. You liked the house in the exclusive zip code. You liked the country club dinners. You liked the illusion that you were better than where you came from. And if the price of that lifestyle was my dignity, you were willing to pay it. That is not true, she protested. I loved you. I tried to protect you. You watched him kick me, I said, turning back to face her. You stood there and watched him kick me while I was on the floor. And you did not call the police. You did not call an ambulance. You told me to go to my room. Alicia buried her face in her hands. You are an accomplice, Alicia, I said coldly. You are not a victim. You are the getaway driver. You drove the car while he robbed me of my pride. And now that the car has crashed, you want me to pay for the tow truck. I am your daughter, she wailed. I am your flesh and blood. Blood does not make you family, I said. Loyalty makes you family. Respect makes you family. And you, Alicia, you have neither. I walked over to the desk in the corner of the room. I opened the drawer. Inside lay my wallet. I opened it. I took out a single bill. It was wrinkled. It was dirty. It had a crease down the middle where it had been folded and unfolded 100 times. I walked back to Alicia. Stand up, I said. She stood up, wiping her face, hoping. She saw the money in my hand. She probably thought it was a check. She probably thought it was the start of a bank transfer. I held out the bill. Take it, I said. She looked at it. She recognized it. It was the $50 bill. The same $50 bill Gavin had thrown on the basement floor. The same $50 bill he had forced me to pick up on my bad knees. "What is this?" she whispered. I took her hand and pressed the bill into her palm. I closed her fingers around it. "This is your inheritance, Alicia," I said. She stared at me in horror. "Daddy, no." "Gavin bought a reproduction for $50, I said. "That is the legal value of what he purchased. And since you chose him over me, since you chose his lies over my truth, this is what you get." I stepped back. "You wanted the money from the transaction," I said. "There it is. $50. Take it and go bail him out." "But Daddy," she screamed, "this won't buy anything." "It will buy a taxi ride to the courthouse," I said. "Or maybe a few minutes of phone time so you can tell him that his plan failed." Alicia looked at the bill in her hand. She looked at me. Her face crumpled. The realization hit her. There was no millions coming. There was no rescue. There was only the cold, hard consequence of her own choices. "Please," she whispered one last time. "I have nowhere to go. They are foreclosing on the house." "Then you better start walking," I said. "I hear the basement in the shelter is very cold this time of year." I walked to the door and held it open. "Get out, Alicia." She stood there for a long time. She looked small and pathetic. But I did not feel pity. I felt relief. I was cutting off a gangrenous limb. It hurt, but it was necessary to save the body. She walked to the door. She paused on the threshold. "I hate you," she hissed. "I know," I said calmly. "You hate me because I survived. Now go." I closed the door. I locked it. I walked back to the window. I watched the street below. A few minutes later, I saw a small figure exit the hotel and walk out into the rain. She did not get into a taxi. She just walked, disappearing into the gray city. I took a deep breath. The air in the room tasted sweet. I went back to my tea. It was still warm. I was alone. But for the first time in 3 years, I was not lonely. I was free. I picked up the phone. I dialed a number. "Hello, Harper," I said. "Yes, Bernard." "Is the foundation paperwork ready?" I asked. "It is ready," Harper said. "Good," I said. "Bring it over." "I want to sign it today. I want every cent of that $3.6 million to go to the Veterans Art Program. I want to make sure that no old soldier ever has to sleep in a basement again." I hung up the phone. I looked at the empty chair where Alicia had sat. "Goodbye, daughter," I whispered. And then I turned my face to the sun that was just beginning to break through the clouds. They say that rock bottom has a basement. Gavin Thorne found out that the basement of rock bottom is cold and it smells of stainless steel and regret. I did not visit him. I had no desire to see him wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed with his pale skin. But I heard reports. Harper kept me informed not because I asked, but because she believed in the completeness of justice. Gavin was being held in the county detention center awaiting trial. He could not make bail. The judge had frozen his assets, and his friends, the ones who drank his scotch and laughed at his jokes, had vanished like smoke in a strong wind. It turns out that socialites are allergic to scandal, and Gavin was not just a scandal. He was a pariah. The recordings Harper played in court did not stay in the courtroom. In the age of the internet, secrets have wings. Someone leaked the audio of Gavin calling me a parasite. Someone leaked the audio of him mocking my intelligence and my race. It went viral. Millions of people heard the arrogant voice of a man who thought he was untouchable. They heard the cruelty. They heard the racism stripped of its polite suburban camouflage. The backlash was swift and brutal. The investment firm where Gavin worked fired him publicly, distancing themselves from his toxic behavior. His college alumni association removed his name from their donor wall. The country club where he played golf and bragged about his handicap revoked his membership, citing a violation of their code of conduct. I imagined him sitting in his cell. It was probably 6 feet by 8 feet, smaller than the room he had forced me to live in. I wondered if he thought about the irony. I wondered if he realized that he had built this cage bar by bar with his own arrogance. Harper told me that he was having a hard time. The other inmates did not like him. They did not like men who abused the elderly. They did not like men who thought they were better than everyone else. Gavin Thorne, the man who demanded only the finest things in life, was now eating bologna sandwiches and sleeping on a thin mattress next to a toilet. He was learning a new language now, not German, but the language of survival. And unlike me, he did not have the strength for it. He tried to call Alicia. He tried to call his former partners. Nobody answered. He was screaming into a void. The silence he had tried to force upon me had now enveloped him completely. He was alone with his thoughts, and for a man like Gavin, that is a fate worse than death. While Gavin was rotting in jail, his kingdom was being dismantled brick by brick. The bank does not care about family drama. The bank cares about numbers. And the numbers on the townhouse were red. With Gavin S. accounts frozen and his income gone, the mortgage payments stopped. The bank wasted no time. They issued a notice of foreclosure. The house that Gavin had stolen from me, the house he had leveraged to the hilt to fund his delusions of grandeur, was seized. I drove by the property one afternoon a few weeks after the trial. I sat in the back of my town car and watched through tinted windows. The lawn was overgrown. The landscaping service had stopped coming when the checks bounced. Weeds were choking the expensive roses Alicia had planted. A large yellow sign was stuck in the grass. Foreclosure auction. It was a pathetic sight. The house looked tired. The windows were dark. It looked like a body that had given up the ghost. I saw the neighbors walking their dogs. The Hendersons, the same people Gavin had tried so hard to impress. They stopped and looked at the sign. They shook their heads. I could see them whispering. They were not mourning the loss of a neighbor. They were gossiping about the scandal. They were worried about their property values. Gavin had sacrificed his soul to belong to this tribe, and in the end, they looked at his ruin as nothing more than an eyesore. The bank scheduled the auction for a Tuesday morning. It was a public sale held on the courthouse steps. It is a humiliating way to lose a home. Your life is sold off to the highest bidder while strangers watch and calculate their profit margins. Gavin heard about it in jail, his public defender told him. I heard he cried. He cried not for the loss of the home, but for the loss of the symbol. That house was his mask. Without it, he was just a broke criminal with a bad reputation. I decided to attend the auction. Not in person. I did not want to give the neighbors the satisfaction of seeing me. I sent a representative, a young lawyer from Harper S. firm named Marcus. He was sharp and he followed instructions perfectly. The bidding was sluggish. The house had a bad energy. People knew the story. They knew it was the house where the famous racist audio recordings were made. It was tainted. The bank opened the bidding at $1.5 million. It was a steal for the neighborhood, but nobody raised a hand. $1.5 million going once the auctioneer called out. Marcus raised his hand. 1.6, he said. There was a pause. A developer in the back raised his hand. 1.7. I was on the phone with Marcus listening. 2 million, Marcus said calmly. The developer shook his head. He knew when to walk away. He did not want a property with baggage. Going once. Going twice. Sold for $2 million. I hung up the phone. I sat back in my chair at the Ritz-Carlton. I owned the house again, but I did not want to live there. I could never sleep under that roof again. There were too many ghosts, too many memories of disrespect, too many echoes of Gavin S. voice. However, I had a plan that would serve as the final nail in the coffin of Gavin S. ego. I hired a construction crew immediately. I told them I wanted the walls torn down. I wanted the space opened up. I wanted the basement, the dark, damp hole where I had been banished, to be gutted and transformed. I turned the basement into a studio. I put in skylights. I put in top-of-the-line ventilation. I filled it with easels and canvases and paints. I turned the main living room, the room where Gavin had shoved me, into a gallery space. I ripped out the beige wallpaper and painted the walls a stark, crisp white. I renamed the house. A month later, the renovations were complete. I drove to the house for the grand opening. A new sign hung by the front gate. It was bronze and beautiful. The Hans Weber Center for Black Artists. I had turned Gavin S.'s exclusive white fortress into a sanctuary for the very people he despised. I had created a residency program for young struggling artists of color. They would live there for free. They would create art. They would fill the house with jazz and laughter and the smell of turpentine. I stood on the sidewalk and watched the first group of residents arrive. They were young, they were talented, they carried portfolios and dreams. One of them, a young man with dreadlocks, looked at the house with wide eyes. "Is this really for us?" he asked me. "It is for you," I said. "It is for anyone who has ever been told they do not belong." I walked them inside. I showed them the gallery. I showed them the kitchen where they could cook communal meals. And then I took them to the basement. "This," I said, standing in the middle of the bright, renovated studio. "This is where the magic happens. This used to be a place of darkness. Now it is a place of light. Paint what you feel. Paint the truth. I thought about Gavin. I knew that news traveled fast in prison. I knew that eventually someone would show him a newspaper or tell him what had become of his precious estate. He would learn that his home was now filled with young black men and women creating art that defied his narrow worldview. He would learn that the basement where he tried to bury me was now the birthplace of a new generation of masters. It was the ultimate justice. I did not burn his house down. I did something far more destructive to his legacy. I replaced his hatred with beauty. I walked out to the front porch and looked at the neighborhood. The Hendersons were peeking out from behind their curtains. Let them look. Let them see that the world was changing. I took a picture of the bronze sign. I texted it to Harper. "Done," I typed. She replied instantly. Hans would be proud. I put my phone away. I felt a lightness in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. The heavy burden of anger was gone, replaced by the steady hum of purpose. I had settled the score. I had reclaimed my dignity. And I had ensured that Gavin Thorne would be remembered not as a successful businessman, but as the fool who lost a kingdom because he couldn't see the value of a human soul. Berlin welcomed me back, not with a parade, but with a gray sky that looked exactly like the layers of paint on Hans Weber's canvas. The air at Brandenburg Airport tasted different than the air in Chicago. In Chicago, the air was heavy with humidity and expectation. It was thick with the silent judgment of people who looked at my skin and my cane and decided I was nothing. But here in Berlin, the air was crisp and smelled of coal smoke and history. It smelled of a city that had been broken in half and glued back together just like me. I stepped out of the taxi in front of the Hotel Adlon. The doorman was a young man with blonde hair and a uniform that fit him perfectly. He saw me struggling to get my leg out of the car. He did not stand back and watch like Gavin used to do. He did not sigh with impatience. He rushed forward. He offered me his arm. "Allow me, sir," he said in English. I looked at him. I smiled. "Danke schön, junger Mann," I replied in clear German. "Aber ich schaffe das schon." "Thank you, young man, but I can manage." The doorman smiled back. Not a condescending smile, a genuine one. "Willkommen zurück in Berlin, mein Herr," he said. "Welcome back, sir." I walked into the lobby. My cane tapped against the marble floor. I was wearing a heavy wool coat I had bought in New York. It was warm. It was expensive. It was the kind of coat a man wears when he has nothing to prove to anyone. I spent the first 2 days just walking. My knees still hurt, but the pain was different now. It was a clean pain. It was the pain of use, not the pain of rust. I walked through the Tiergarten. I walked past the Brandenburg Gate. I walked to the neighborhood in Kreuzberg where the old loft used to be. The building was still there. It had been renovated. The broken windows were gone, replaced by modern glass. The graffiti was gone. But I closed my eyes and I could still see it. I could still see Hans standing in the doorway with paint on his hands, smoking a cigarette and telling me that art was the only truth worth dying for. I took a taxi to the cemetery on the outskirts of the city. It was a quiet place overgrown with ivy. I found the simple stone marker, Hans Weber, 1948 to 2014. I stood there for a long time. The wind bit at my face, but I did not button my collar. I wanted to feel it. "I did it, Hans," I whispered. I made them listen. I placed a copy of the auction catalog on the grave. The cover featured a glossy, high-resolution image of the chaos of silence. "You are not forgotten, my friend," I said. "You are immortal now. And the man who called your work trash is sitting in a cell where the only view is a concrete wall." I turned away. I did not cry. Soldiers do not cry when the mission is accomplished. We just pack up our gear and move on to the next objective. On the third day, I went to the museum. The Museum of Contemporary Art in Berlin is a glass fortress. It is a place where culture is guarded like gold. I walked up the wide steps. Banners hung from the roof announcing the new exhibition, Post-War Shadows. I walked to the ticket counter. I reached for my wallet. The woman behind the glass looked at me. She looked at my face. Then she looked at a photograph taped to her desk. Her eyes went wide. "Herr Freeman?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Please," she said, pressing a button on her phone. "Wait one moment. The director wanted to know the second you arrived." 2 minutes later, a tall woman with glasses and an intense expression came hurrying across the lobby. She walked straight to me and extended both hands. "Mr. Freeman," she said, "it is an honor. A true honor. She did not look past me. She did not look through me. She looked at me with a reverence that made my throat tight. "Please come," she said. "It is this way." She led me through the galleries. We passed tourists and students. We passed security guards who nodded as we walked by. We entered the main hall, and there it was. The chaos of silence hung on the center wall. It was lit perfectly. It dominated the room. A group of art students sat on the floor in front of it, sketching in their notebooks. A tour guide was explaining the brushwork to a group of Japanese visitors. I walked closer. I looked at the small brass plaque next to the painting. The Chaos of Silence. Hans Weber, 1978. Gift of the Bernard Freeman Foundation. I stood there and let the words wash over me. Gift. Not sale. Gift. I had donated the money. All of it. After the taxes and the legal fees and the cost of the renovation on Gavin S. house, I had given the rest to the museum to fund a scholarship for artists who had no voice. I felt a hand on my arm. It was not Gavin S. heavy gripping hand. It was a light, respectful touch. I turned. An old man was standing there. He wore a beret and a scarf. He looked at me with watery eyes. "Bernard," he asked. I squinted. I looked at the lines on his face. I looked past the age. "Klaus," I asked. He laughed, a wheezing, joyful sound. He pulled me into a hug. Klaus was one of the others, one of the group who used to hang out in the loft back in the 70s. He was a poet back then. I heard the news, Klaus said, stepping back. I saw the name in the paper. I told my wife that it had to be you, the American soldier who brought us cigarettes and chocolate, the quiet one. "I am not so quiet anymore, Klaus," I said, smiling. We sat in the museum cafe for hours. We drank strong coffee and ate apple strudel. We talked about the old days. We talked about Hans. Klaus told me about his grandchildren. I told him about the center I had opened in Chicago. For the first time in years, I was not just a body taking up space. I was not a problem to be solved or a burden to be managed. I was Bernard. I was a friend. I was a man with a history and a future. I looked around the cafe. I saw people talking, laughing, reading. I saw a world that was vibrant and alive. And I realized that I was part of it again. Gavin had tried to erase me. He had tried to edit me out of the picture. He wanted me to be a smudge in the background. But he forgot that you cannot paint over the truth. The truth always bleeds through eventually. I finished my coffee. I said goodbye to Klaus, promising to meet him for dinner the next day. I walked out of the museum and down the street toward the river. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of violet and gray. I found a bench by the water and sat down. My cane rested against my knee. I thought about the journey that had brought me here. I thought about the basement. I thought about the cold nights on the cot. I thought about the moment Gavin threw that $50 bill on the floor. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out my wallet. I did not have that $50 bill anymore. I had given it to Alicia. It was the only thing I had given her. And it was exactly what she deserved. I wondered where she was now. I wondered if she had bailed Gavin out or if she had used the money for a bus ticket to nowhere. It did not matter. Their story was over. My story was just beginning. I took a deep breath, inhaling the cool river air. I had learned a hard lesson in the last few months. I learned that value is not determined by the appraiser. It is not determined by the auctioneer. And it is certainly not determined by the people who claim to love you while they steal your soul. Value is determined by what you are willing to defend. Gavin looked at a masterpiece and saw trash because his soul was empty. He looked at me and saw a burden because his heart was small. I looked at a piece of canvas and saw a revolution. I looked in the mirror and saw a survivor. People think that silence is weakness. They think that because you are old or because you are slow or because you are sitting in the corner that you have nothing to say. They are wrong. Silence is not empty. Silence is full of answers. Silence is where you sharpen your sword. Silence is where you load the gun. I watch the boats drift down the river. I am 68 years old. My knees hurt. My shoulder aches when it rains. I have no wife. I have no children I can call my own. But I have my name. I have my dignity. And I have the knowledge that when the test came, I did not break. I stood up. I buttoned my coat. Tomorrow I would go to the university and speak to the art students. I would tell them about Hans. I would tell them about the power of seeing what others miss. I started walking back toward the hotel. My step was slow, but it was steady. My name is Bernard Freeman. I am a soldier. I am a father. I am a patron of the arts. And to anyone out there who is being told they are worthless, to anyone who is being pushed into a basement, to anyone who is being silenced, listen to me. Do not shout. Do not fight. Do not beg. Just wait. Watch. And keep the receipt. Because every dog has his day, but the wolf owns the night. If you enjoyed my story, please leave a like and tell me in the comments which city you are listening from. I read every single one. And remember, never let anyone tell you what you are worth. That is for you to decide. See you in the next story. I learned that true power does not need to shout to be heard. It sits quietly in the knowledge of its own worth. Gavin thought he could define my value based on my age and my background, but he was wrong. Value is internal. It is built on integrity, history, and the choices we make when we think no one is watching. Never let the noise of the world drown out your inner truth. If someone treats you like a cheap copy, remember that you are an original masterpiece, and originals are priceless. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder of their worth. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice and redemption.